Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 581. One Wish. Of course, I didn't actually expect that you told me all of that for free. You had to be laying groundwork of some sort. Northern fixed the man with a glare. What do you want? Lieutenant Dante studied his eyes for a moment and smiled faintly, his eyes half closing. Please do not look so wary. I am not going to ask you to join my soldiers. Northern furrowed his brows, his pupils focusing heavily on the lieutenant. You were going to ask that? Ask what? What? I'm not asking anything. Then what do you want? Northern inquired seriously. The lieutenant took a breath and observed everyone doing their thing down there. He narrowed his eyes for a bit, then spoke. It looks like your father is close to breaking into Maverick rank. Northern narrowed his eyes toward his father. It was easy for him to see the content of his father's and everyone else's souls, which was somehow even better than when he could see them in letters. Of course, he could still do that if he wanted. It was just that now, he could see the soul cores and see the saturation of soul essence in them. Shin's soul core had an almost dark color and was shaped like a pyramid. Ryan's soul core seemed like a flame sculpted from the fragment of a clear blue sky. It had a strange beauty. Northern didn't quite expect his soul core to look like a flame. He was even a bit surprised that everyone's soul core was starkly different from the others. It was understandable, with such great detail to every soul core. It was impossible for two same talents to exist in different people. And then there's him. He looked at Shin one more time, smiled, and muttered, "It's about time." Shin had probably been stuck as a master for close to or perhaps over 20 years. Northern was sincerely happy he was progressing. He brought his eyes back to focus on the lieutenant. So? Ah, right. Look at me spacing out. His voice died down for a moment. His gaze carried a solemn seriousness. There was this intangible authority that lingered on his entire face. He resumed. What I want is a wish. A wish. Northern raised a brow, confused. Yes, a wish. Don't worry. It's nothing like me trying to defraud you. You would have 3 equal wishes. Anything you want right now, I would do it, no matter what it is. And I want you to do the same. Northern narrowed his eyes. Anything at all? You will do. The lieutenant nodded with a small smile. Yes, anything at all. A broad grin appeared on Northern's lips. Then he belatedly took reins of his emotion, erasing the smile from his face. What are you on to? You say you are not trying to defraud me, but you are saying I should give you the one-moment ticket of me being totally vulnerable to you. The lieutenant's face was focused down. Well, it depends on how you look at it. I am also giving you that opportunity to do the same to me. Isn't there something you want from me? A paragon. So is that to say there's something you want from me? No, but I am not ruling out the fact that I will want something from you in the future. Northern scrunched up his face, still suspicious of Lieutenant Dante's actions. But the lieutenant was right. There was something he wanted from the lieutenant so badly. In fact, it was not just one thing. I will comply on one condition. The lieutenant's face finally turned to Northern. Not 2 but 3? That's quite a lot. It's fine if you don't want to do it. I'm not insisting. You are the one that came to me with this. The lieutenant smiled and turned away from Northern. It's fine. We can do 3, however, on the condition that they have to be doable within this rift. Northern tilted his head to take a peek at the lieutenant's face. Is yours going to be doable within this rift? The lieutenant was silent for a few seconds. Then he shook his head. I don't think there's anything I want from you right now. His response immediately put a dark frown on Northern's face. That's crap you are giving me. Total crap. You are telling me you don't want anything from me, but you are going to give me the opportunity to ask 3 things. Anything at all from you? I might be 16, but I am actually older than I look in my brain. Lieutenant Dante glanced at him and smiled again. His smile was short but honest. I want to lay groundwork for us to be friends. You are 16 years old, a sage. I think you are the first to appear of your kind. In the next 10 years, I won't be surprised if you are a luminary. I'd be a zenith in 10 years' time. Lieutenant Dante chuckled. He clearly didn't believe it. Let's be humble now, all right? He paused for a second and continued. What I'm just saying is I want to be in a position where I can benefit from your position and influence in the future. Don't worry. I am not being shady. Northern was silent for a while, thinking. Afterward, he opened his mouth and spoke. All right then, no problem. If that is how you feel for real, then I will take your offer. Lieutenant Dante smiled again. Thank you. So what are the 3 things you want? I'll tell you one at a time after each one is done. First, I want you to teach me how to fight. You want me to teach you how to fight? The lieutenant turned to him again, his brows raised. Yes. Northern nodded in consent. To be exact, I want you to teach me your combat style. He stared into the lieutenant's eyes. I know I said anything, but that's quite. You can't do it? Lieutenant Dante looked down for a moment. Oh? Looks like your father just became a savant. Others seem to be rounding up later too. Should we carry on later? Northern turned to Shin, who was slowly getting up. All right then. Both of them jumped down from the ice wall. Chapter 582, Cold Truth. Along with Shin's successful progression into another soul rank, the rest of them also rounded up and concluded their essence absorption. Dante took a short glance at Shane's wound but did not say anything. Instead, he turned away with a small distress hinting behind his eyes. Shane lowered her head and bit down on her lips. She didn't need to be told outright. She felt like she was being a burden to the lieutenant. No, she was sure of it. Northern studied all of them, his eyes carrying a faint light of deep scrutiny before he spoke. Since we all seem to be in a good place, I think we should proceed further into the rift. The longer we stay in here, the more dangerous I presume it will be. All of them had differently portrayed expressions of tiredness on their facial features, but did a commendable job at hiding it. After all, no kids existed here. If anyone was to be thrown under such classification, it would be Northern, and funnily, he was the unspoken, unassigned, and silently consented leader of the group. Studying their faces once more, he said, I don't think there will be enormous numbers like this one. Going forward, the monsters we will be fighting might just be stronger. We've still not come across any behemoths. And the destroyers that we have been seeing are hazardous and disastrous level. He glanced in Shane, Hansel, and Raphael's direction. We only came across one devil, which was a Hellion. My senses are picking up several insanely strong monsters. I suspect we may encounter more of those devilish rabid rots, and even worse, devilish maelstrom and calamitous or catastrophic destroyers. As Northern spoke, the crude manner at which fear seemed to gnaw at their hearts grew insidiously devastating. They were all maintaining straight faces and were focused on Northern as he spoke. No one at this point doubted his words anymore, only a fool would. Which was why the truth of their situation settled in with a sickening intensity. If any one of them were weak-willed, they'd probably have raised their hands to opt out at this moment. Aside from the fact that looking for a way out of the rift was another task, wandering around the rift could stumble one upon a very strong monster, one he or she cannot defeat, hence bringing down upon themselves their own gruesome death. No one, especially none of the lieutenant's subordinates who looked to be the weakest of the group, could dare say they wanted to opt out. Their hearts beat with a toxic fear that sent fissures of pain around their nervous system. But they boldly stood, their faces rigidly contorted as Northern conveyed the news. Northern paid extra attention to them, surprised at how they wouldn't budge. However, he was also disgusted by it. Being able to look so deep into a human soul thanks to Chaos Eyes, he had been granted the ability not just to see the emotions of people, but to manipulate them to an extent. Of course, Northern, since the first time he received an ability like that, did not pay it any heed. He wasn't interested in manipulating someone to feel fear for him. If one would feel extreme fear for him or despair at his presence, it would be because the aura of his presence and reputation came together in that moment to create such a result. But he still could see the emotions that they tried so much to hide underneath their bowels and fortified faces. It disgusted him. It disgusted him because they were breaking on the inside, and the only thing they cared about was pleasing this dude whom they looked up to and respected. Why? Was it fame? A salary raise? They wanted higher positions in the military? They wanted to win his favor? Northern didn't care what it was. He didn't think anything of frivolity was worth throwing one's life away for. But then again, he couldn't really blame these people. They've not lived a life where every day is worse than the battle we just fought, where there's no guarantee that anyone will see tomorrow, and yet we just fight. Northern shook his head, sending away the thought. It's none of my business anyway. So you are saying that the battles going forward will only be tougher but with no immense numbers? Alistran asked, sweat breaking out on his face. Northern let out an ugly smile. Then he erased it and answered, at least you won't have to fight while being insecure about your back. Alistran raised his head and slapped his face. Damn it. I knew coming into this rift was a bad idea. We should have just waited for more drifters. We have Northern and we have a Paragon. We will tackle the worst and come out of this alive. Ryan inputted. His input, however, grabbed everyone's attention. Since when did you speak such amazing words, Ryan? Northern grinned. As flattered as I am about your words, I'd rather us expect the worst than say we will come out of this alive. He glared at all of them, adding, I'm saying, if you feel like you are not ready to die, my opinion is that you should take a gamble and find your way out of the rift. He pointed towards the north. I know that way leads deeper into where the stronger monsters are because I can feel the intensity of the presences emanating from there. You can go back and carefully trace where we've been coming from. There are no monsters there at all. Dropping his hand, he fell silent for a moment, focused on Dante's subordinates for a moment, and averted his gaze. But if you are sure that you want to keep going, from experience I'd advise you to steel yourself so much that if you die and go to hell, you won't whine about it. His voice was resolute and cold. I don't know what to be scared of, that a 16-year-old is uttering such cold and harrowing words, or that those words hold all the truth that we need at this moment in them. Alistran muttered, sending a glance over to Shin who was beside him, hearing him clearly. Shin just silently stared at his son, his expression blank, and his eyes perfectly hiding his pain. Chapter 583. Devilish Behemoth, Dark Turtle Part 1. Northern's words hung heavy in their hearts as they silently proceeded forward. Despite the harshness they conveyed, no one had decided to leave the group and head toward where there were fewer monsters. Northern had delivered his point with that deliberate wickedness of words, hoping that they'd at least choose to save themselves. But no one seemed broken enough to turn back. Or could it be that their respect and followership toward the lieutenant was of greater fear than the fear of death? If that was the case, he didn't think the source of their stubbornness was of a frivolous origin. Perhaps the lieutenant just held a more paralyzing fear that, as long as he was standing there, they'd rather die than give up. Or is it admiration? Huh? No way. You can't admire someone to the point of dying to please them. Northern refuted in his head. He truly didn't understand the bunch. He felt like he had lost touch of something. Something like, he had once been like that. But grabbing onto the memory felt so difficult. It was like that entire part of him was obscured by a thick, stubborn darkness. The more I get stronger, the more I feel like I am losing myself. I can barely even remember my old self before coming to this world, or that I once lived. The feeling once more became vivid to Northern. He sighed and focused forward. All of them were walking side by side. Ryan and the Paragon seemed to be talking about something in front. Alistran and Shin flanked the right side, walking with each other. The group of three walked toward the left side, behind Ryan and Dante. Jesai and Linus silently walked behind Northern. And he had dismissed Night Terror and Black Mamba for both of them to get enough rest and be ready for when things got dreary. Northern walked closer to Shin and looked at Alistran. Please, can I have a moment with my father? Of course. Alistran tapped Shin's shoulders and stepped back while Northern took his place, walking next to Shin. Both of them were silent for a few moments, until Shin's voice hesitantly rolled out. "Sue, congratulations on becoming a savant." Shin smiled shortly, his eyes focused on that barren crimson plain in front of him. "I am still far behind, compared to you." Northern squinted his eyes. "You don't need to compare yourself to me. Honestly, I am not comfortable with it." Shin, for the first time since they started walking together, looked at him, his eyes a bit dilated. "Things did happen that we never expected they would, and I kind of got stronger than anyone planned. But it changes nothing. You and Mom raised me with so much love, while you guys overprotected me, which was harmful when I found myself in the dark continent alone. It is because of your love and upbringing that I am still able to maintain this level of sanity and morality." Northern allowed a pale smile. "Anybody else would have just gone mad, I guess." Shin did feel a bit relieved at his son's words. But no, he didn't think he could allow himself to be that relieved yet. They needed to find Aisha, and together with his wife, they would finally assess and know what had happened to their son, and also bear the pain of failing as parents. He wasn't confident of doing it alone. But if it was with Aisha, he was sure they would be able to burrow into Northern and make him open himself emotionally to them. Which was why he needed to find Aisha as soon as possible. Shin gritted his teeth and clenched his fist tightly. Northern glanced at his hands and focused to the front. After a few seconds, he asked, "The elf, what about him?" Shin's hands relaxed as he heard the question. He retorted, his breath calming. "When the rift exploded and swallowed me, I woke up with the lady and the guy who introduced themselves as Jesai and Linus, but he was nowhere around. He would be somewhere around." "No." Shin took a look at his son's cold and calculating eyes as he added, "I suspect that he didn't even enter the rift with us. He probably used the rift to mask his essence flow so he'd be temporarily undetectable. It's a good thing I moved Mother as fast as I could," he thought. "Still, being able to summon a rift. I don't understand what is going on anymore," Shin expressed. Northern suddenly paused, his brows twitching. "Is something wrong, Northern?" He turned his face to his father, his face stale for a bit. Then a smile broke out and his words came out with strange warmth. "I have found Mother and Silver, and secured both of them." Shin's eyes widened slowly as those words settled into his mind. As his eyes widened, tears settled at the base of his lids, waiting to stream down. However, Northern's next statement killed it. "But now is not the time to be happy about it." Shin's brows came together. "What do you mean?" Northern looked straight into his father's eyes. The formal warmth in his words had been frozen, like it never existed. "The only reason I told you this is so that you can be motivated to survive what is coming for us. You must live to see your wife no matter what. I might not have the time to protect you or anyone, so be sure not to die. Well, I trust you won't, knowing that your wife and child are waiting for you." "What? What do you mean?" Shin was confused. Northern faced the front and bent down, touching the ground. "Everyone stop." His voice rang out, halting everyone in their tracks. Only when Dante stopped did he suddenly frown. Before he could say anything, his reflex kicked in, leaping him powerfully far behind, such that he covered over 100 meters in one leap. Everyone was shocked as they saw the lieutenant, the strongest among them, suddenly become a blur over their heads and now standing so far away from them. With a dark expression, they all turned to Northern, who was still crouched and touching the ground. Northern exhaled shakily and looked at them with a very tired smile. "Looks like we're finally going to meet a behemoth. A devilish one at that." Chapter 584. Devilish Behemoth, Dark Turtle Part 2. Their faces and composure shifted the moment Northern spoke. Maybe they would have had small fragments of doubt when Northern spoke, but Dante's strange behavior just now was all too informing. Tension mixed with silence and made the air around them heavy. Northern closed his eyes, his hand softly touching the crimson ground. Since they were ascending a slope, the murky waters around this area had greatly reclined, falling back to the lower slope of the plain. All their attention converged on Northern. They were nervously waiting to hear the next thing he was going to say. While Northern had his eyes closed, his awareness peaked in that moment. The creature was very far, too far for anyone, even the best of scouts, to sense it. Of course, except for paragons who had heightened danger detection. "It's coming closer." Northern's hoarse voice finally made its debut after minutes. But following it was a subtle but obvious trembling of the ground. It was as if to inform them how correct Northern was. The creature was getting closer to them. Northern squinted his eyes. "I was right. It's moving beneath the ground. It's burrowing." Ignoring the part where he said he was right because no one ever noticed him mention it, they were all concerned about the latter statement. "What do you mean it's burrowing?" Alistran inquired, his facial features folding. Northern looked up at him and stood up, glancing around. "I don't have much to say other than everyone's life is in their hands." Northern's choice of words made their hearts suddenly heavier than usual, chills prickling their skin. He wished he could have chosen a better route with his words. But he couldn't afford to. He didn't know how things would go with a behemoth. He had never faced one before. So rather than sugarcoat words and be optimistic, he'd rather be pessimistic and say the truth in the crudest way possible to prepare their hearts. "He is right," Dante said as he walked closer to them. "What I felt just now. I am not sure I have ever fought something like that." And that explained the reason for his unexpected response. At the same time, hearing him speak even made them feel worse. The trembling of the earth beneath them escalated, a rumble that crawled up through their feet, setting their nerves on edge. The ground felt alive, as if the very land itself was twisting in anticipation of the creature that lurked below. Northern steadied himself, his gaze hard, the shadows in his eyes betraying no hint of fear, only a grim acceptance. "Everyone, spread out," Northern ordered, his voice like steel. "Don't cluster together. It's exactly what it wants." They scrambled into position, each one glancing back at the undulating ground as if it might explode at any second. Alistran tightened his grip on his weapon. A long sword, the edges of his expression wavering. He glanced at Dante, looking for some assurance, but Dante's face was a mask that concealed the same fear clawing at the rest of them. Then, the ground split open, and with it, a wave of stale, suffocating heat surged up. It was as if a breath from the underworld had reached them, curling around their limbs, making their skin crawl. The air grew thick, cloying with the scent of damp earth and something metallic, something foreboding. And then, they saw it. The creature's dark shell emerged first, like a vast boulder pushing up from the depths, glistening with the crimson glow from the murky sky above. It was like a dark turtle molded from the crimson sky and pure darkness. It rose slowly, purposefully, each second stretching as its black armor cracked and shifted, plates sliding over one another with a deep, grinding sound that felt like it could tear the world apart. Northern's eyes narrowed, tracking every motion, every twitch, every subtle shift. Its single red eye gleamed through the gaps in its armor, a pulsing, unblinking sphere that looked more like an open wound, watching them all with a predatory gleam. The red lines that snaked across its armored body pulsed, alive, as if the monster's very essence was blood and rage contained within that shell. The dark turtle's eye fixed on Northern, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to shrink. There was a strange message in its gaze, and Northern instantly knew. He knew when he could recognize the strongest in the group. The creature had immediately singled him out with its gaze. Then, without warning, it surged forward, the ground beneath it splitting in its wake, chunks of earth flung up like shrapnel. The force of its charge shook the ground like a thunderclap. Everyone in that moment scattered away from the creature's path. It was thanks to them heeding Northern's advice to spread out that it had been possible, although shards of stones still bombarded some. Northern immediately leaped back as the creature moved, and in his hands, raised above his head, a black lance was materializing. There was a folded frown on his face as he locked gazes with the monster. He didn't know why he had a very strange and unsettling feeling. His eyes looked like they were begging for this to end before it began and the black lance should not fail. With a swift, almost undetectable speed, still as he lunged back to get farther away from the monster, he swung and threw the black lance forward. The dark turtle's single red eye flared as if in mocking recognition, and the creature shifted its massive armored shell. The lance, instead of piercing through, struck the shell's surface with a metallic clang and shattered into fragments of black energy, dissipating into nothingness. "Tch, I knew it." Northern's face hardened, his jaw clenched. The unsettling feeling in his chest only grew. The creature didn't give him a moment to recover. With an earth-shaking roar, it lunged again, its bulk deceptively fast as it closed the distance, scattering loose stones and dirt in its wake. Northern's instincts screamed at him to move, to dodge, but the dark turtle's presence bore down on him, pressing like a weight against his senses. Dante was the first to break out of the paralyzing state they were all in. He launched himself forward with a burst of red energy. His sword flashed, arcs of light slicing through the air as he aimed for the creature's exposed underbelly. The dark turtle twisted, deflecting the attack with its impenetrable shell. As it shifted its focus, Alistran leaped in from the side, his long sword aimed at one of the pulsing red lines. But the monster caught wind of his movement, quickly adjusting its body to deflect with its dark shell. As Alistran's sword connected with the monster's back, it exploded back, throwing him away. Just as Alistran flew away, Shin shot in, his form dividing into three that flew into different directions. His main body toward the monster's forelimb, one appearing in front and the last one swiftly circling to the back. Simultaneously they attacked. Black essence oozed out of not just Shin's sword but his entire body as he wove a strange pattern of swordsmanship. Northern had firstly almost likened it to void essence, but no, it wasn't. It was just Shin's soul essence form. Darkness. "So that's how it looks," Northern acknowledged as he watched how Shin wove intricate sword patterns and bombarded the monster. The dark essence seemed to curl like multiple blades, all complementing the delicate movement of his legs and hands. And with each connected strike was an almost thunderous resonance. The most terrifying part was that there was a perfect synchronization with all three clones. Northern didn't see the one behind, but he could see the one in front. It was as if they were perfectly, without fail, mirroring every step without even looking. There had to be a network of information that did not take time to deliver for such magnificent display of sword art to be made possible. Northern remembered Link and how perfectly it worked. Looking at his father right now, he understood that Shin had mastered the ability to a level that he had never reached. Of course he has. Northern felt slightly proud. He had always suspected Shin to be strong and always hoped he was right. This instance proved that he had been right about his father all along. Sadly, it was all useless. Every chain of attack was being perfectly deflected by the monster without a waste of movement. All it just had to do was shift its shell slightly. Its form was so enormous and the shell itself covered more than half the area of its body. There were little to no places to strike. Even its legs were covered by the black shell and same red veins. Shin, when he saw all his effort was easily being nullified, had to take a moment of recess, jumping back. As he jumped back, Dante entered the monster's space again. His movement this time seemed more vicious and dangerous. He swung his sword with brutal strength, delivering an arc from the side to the monster's forelimb on Shin's opposite side. But the swing was once again deflected with an even more outrageous force that sent the lieutenant reeling. Chapter 585. Chaos Flame, True Form, Part 1. Northern watched as Dante stumbled back, his boots scraping against the crimson ground. The lieutenant's face betrayed a flash of frustration, perhaps even fear. Northern's eyes purposefully measured and followed every single one of their strikes. By now, it was evident enough that the shell areas of the dark turtle served not just as a damage absorber but also a damage reflector. The dark turtle's single eye seemed to pulse with cruel intelligence as it tracked their movements. Its massive form shifted, the black plates of its armor grinding against each other like tectonic plates in motion. That sound, that horrible grinding, seemed to reach into Northern's chest and squeeze. Something about it felt wrong, fundamentally wrong, as if the noise itself was an affront to nature. Northern gritted his teeth, gnashing angrily as he propped himself up. "Damn turtle!" he muttered in disgust, circling his arm, the left first and then the right, before fixing the monster with a dirty glare. As if waiting for him, the creature's eye flared bright crimson. The red veins across its shell pulsed, and suddenly the air grew thick with an oppressive energy. Northern felt it first, a crushing weight that seemed to press against his very soul. His legs trembled, fighting against an invisible force that threatened to bring him to his knees. "Everyone move!" he shouted. But his warning came a fraction too late. The dark turtle's shell erupted with crimson light, and waves of force exploded outward in all directions. The ground beneath their feet cracked and splintered, fragments of earth hanging suspended in the air for a heartbeat before being violently repelled. Alistron was caught mid-stride. The wave struck him like a physical blow, sending him tumbling backward. He managed to drive his sword into the ground, using it as an anchor. It was not enough. The force uprooted and threw him into the air, but thin, green threads flew out of his body and attached themselves to the ground, pulling and grounding him with an even more resisting force. Northern blinked for a moment, observing the guy's ability. He looked down and saw, "You have discovered talent, mulish thread. Hey, do you want to copy mulish thread for 700 talent fragments?" "Oh, cool. Yes," he grinned. "You have copied talent, mulish thread, for 700 talent fragments. I guess I'll check it out later." Northern raised his head, returning his focus to the ongoing battle. Everyone was actively engaging and disengaging the monster, everyone except the lieutenant's trio. They had tried, but one reflected damage had sent Shane reeling so far back that finding her way would be another hectic work and walk for her. The other two understood that there was no place for them in this battle. Even Ryan couldn't find an opening to attack. He wasn't the best when it came to close combat, but his destructive ability made up for that more than enough. However, he was being very calculative. There was no way he was just going to attack without inhibiting the rapid and flowing movements of the rest of them. As the force struck, he put up a fortress of ice, but it meant nothing. Everything shattered into splinters as he was thrown away. Shin's clones dissipated instantly from the brunt of the monster's red energy. The dark essence that formed them scattered like smoke in a storm. The real Shin barely managed to cross his arms before the blast reached him, his feet sliding backward, leaving deep grooves in the earth. Dante fared slightly better, having anticipated the attack. He dropped low, one hand pressed against the ground. His body wreathed in a faint red glow that seemed to deflect the worst of the force. Northern easily shielded himself with void force. The blast seemed like it was sucked into the air, but his body felt the strong force of the attack, taking him back one step. As the waves of force subsided, leaving them all staggered, the dark turtle's eye fixed once again on Northern. There was something almost contemplative in that gaze now, as if it was measuring him anew. Something about the look in the creature's eyes did not sit well with Northern, and it was even more frustrating that he couldn't quite put his finger on it yet. He had faced powerful enemies before, but this was different. This creature wasn't just strong, it was intelligent, methodical, patient. And they were running out of options. The red veins in its shell began to pulse again, faster this time. Whatever was coming next would be worse. Much worse. The dark turtle's shell began to emit a low, resonating hum that made Northern's teeth ache. The crimson veins pulsed with increasing intensity, like a heartbeat growing stronger, more urgent. "It's charging something," Northern thought, his eyes narrowing. "But what? Don't let it finish whatever it's doing," Dante shouted, already moving forward despite the obvious strain in his movements from the previous attack. "Everyone stop." Northern's voice rolled out like thunder. With the way his voice came out, there was no way anyone wouldn't stop. All of them, even the already moving Dante, were halted in their tracks by Northern's voice. Dante turned. "This is really not the time for your show-off." Northern had a dark frown on his face as he turned to the lieutenant. "Show-off? I'm about to take on this damn thing for real. Who's talking to you about show-off?" The rest of you are just going to be a hindrance. The creature paused, its eyes gluing to Northern, who slowly walked forward. It was as if there was a silent, intellectual acknowledgement from the monster as Northern moved closer. Its kind of behavior was not one any of them had seen. Except Northern, of course. Devils are quite the annoying monsters. With a behemoth, I can tell how dangerous a monster of such caliber would be. His eyes radiated with a cold blue light. I have spent the past few minutes gauging the monster's ability. Not just with his senses but also his magnificent eyes. Northern grinned sinisterly. Don't worry, it's beatable. I got worked up for nothing really. All of them frowned in different shades. I said this is not the time for that, Dante yelled. Northern, this is a behemoth, you said it yourself. This is something we have to work together to defeat. Only you can't do this. Northern raised a corner of his lips, his eyes fixed on the monster. Nah, I'm enough. He looked at them again. You all can step back. No one will be dying soon after all. Shin and the others finally stepped back, taking several leaps to give Northern and the monster enough space. Northern raised his hand, looking at his palm with a dangerous look in his eyes. Come, black flame. Black flame ignited in his hands, dancing gently with a bluish dark depth. The dark luminescence of the flame reflected on Northern's face as his eyes pierced deeper into it. Then his voice came again, this time low. He was talking to himself. Infuse it with chaos essence instead of void. The flames escalated, in an instant changing color from black to impure white, however, still keeping its flame properties. Only now, its otherworldly dance was more intimidating and awe-striking, dwarfing both Northern and the monster. What is that? Alistran muttered in confusion from where he was. The rest of them also had that expression that asked the same question. Northern looked at the flames, satisfied. So this is what the true chaos flames look like, huh? Since he had no chaos essence, void essence had always been used to propagate both black flame and black lance. But they were essentially parts of chaos flame. And now that Northern could use chaos essence, he would finally be able to bring the attribute to life. He raised his second hand, spreading out his palm, and he uttered, "Black lance." A vicious black spear appeared from his palm, plunging toward the sky with ominous sparks running around it. Northern observed to his satisfaction, then infused the lance with chaos essence. Just like before, the lance exploded. As it exploded, the surrounding ground began to slice randomly. All of them immediately put up all their defenses to protect themselves, watching the clean, untraceable cuts that separated several points of the ground. Northern's expression became more evil as he thought. I wonder what will happen when the true nature of a flame that can burn anything mixes with the true nature of a lance that can deliver a cut that only its target can take. A twisted darkness fell on his face, blue light radiating in his eyes. The monster also seemed to be taking its time waiting for Northern, taking forever to charge up its strike. Now let's watch you absorb and deflect this. The air grew thick with tension as Northern's aura shifted, becoming darker, more malevolent. The white flame danced before him like living entities, casting eerie shadows across the crimson ground. With deliberate slowness, Northern brought his hands together. The flames and the lance began to swirl, intertwining in a display that made reality itself seem to warp. Chapter 586. Chaos Flame, True Form, Part 2. Let's see. Northern concentrated, his eyes glowing brighter. The properties of both. The combination of the two forces merged together like two lovers having waited 100 years for their reunion. There was even a magnetic force that Northern had to powerfully resist in order to control things at his own pace. A smile formed on his face as he could ascertain for himself that what he had evaluated about chaos flames was exactly what was happening. Along with the subtle awakening of chaos had come its memories of usage, which Northern was now enjoying the privileges of. The dark turtle's eye pulsed faster, its charging sequence reaching a crescendo. The red veins across its shell blazed like rivers of blood. From where they watched, the others felt the air grow heavy, as if reality itself was being compressed between these two forces. Shin's eyes were grave as he watched Northern. Everyone had a pale mixture of confusion, fear, and hope lining their facial features. Dante seemed like the most affected about what was going on. It was quite understandable, since they had been in this rift. What should be his place hadn't quite been his place. He had fallen short of even his own expectations. Not that he wasn't strong. He was strong. A devilish behemoth would have been difficult for him, but it was doable. However, he didn't think he'd be able to guarantee everyone's safety like Northern had just done. Northern's voice cut through the air, cold and precise. Chaos Flame. The weapon that formed in his hands defied description. It wasn't quite a lance, and it wasn't quite flame. It existed in a state between states, its form constantly shifting between solid and ethereal. The impure white flames wrapped around a core of absolute darkness, creating a spiral pattern that hurt to look at directly. Where the two forces met, small tears appeared in the air itself, as if the weapon's very existence was an affront to natural law. Northern's grin turned predatory. You've been reflecting our attacks using that shell of yours. Absorbing the force, redirecting it. The dark turtle seemed to sense the danger. Its charging sequence suddenly accelerated, the humming from its shell rising to a fever pitch. But you can't reflect what doesn't exist in a stable state, Northern continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. And you can't absorb what burns through the very concept of absorption. The creature's eye widened, if such a thing was possible, and for the first time, Northern saw something new in its gaze. Uncertainty. Without warning, the dark turtle released its charged attack. A wave of crimson energy, far more concentrated than before, erupted from its shell. Instead of the circular wave that was directed at dispelling everyone, the monster focused all its energy at Northern, shooting it forward, the red light raising the ground and consuming everything in its path. Northern! Shin shouted, seeing as the wave of light surged towards him and consumed him before he could put up any defenses. Dante raised his head. All that talk and he was killed before he could even strike. No, Northern! Shin was despairing and wanted to run forward but was held back by Linus. What do you think you are doing? Shin's voice came out strong and terrifying. Anybody that wasn't the arrogant and vengeful Linus would have flinched, no doubt. Do you really think he'd die that easily? His words made Shin's eyes dilate. The rogue scion of Kageyama slowly shifted his head. Clouds of dust obscured the view, but they soon slowly dissipated. The monster had a light of assurance and confidence radiating in its eye, as if it had one. But as the wind cleared, a voice reached out. All that charge, and this is the best you could do. Everyone trembled. Their eyes expanded so much that they could fall off. Northern was revealed between the now light cloud of dust. He was grinning, the chaos flame still in his hand. He was untouched by the attack, not even the smallest scratch on his body. The attack had carved the ground and left the point he was standing untouched, improvising it into an island of some sort. Northern contorted his mouth pitifully at the monster. Quite sad. You did all that and didn't even leave a scratch on me. Oh well, guess it's my turn now. The monster's eye flickered. Its entire body began to blaze with crimson energy, surging forward like a pillar of flame. Northern's mouth opened, delighted as he saw the monster freak out. That's more like it. Struggle for your life. Try to leave, he said, carefully waiting for the monster. The creature struck again, gathering all its energy. The entire ground trembled, a sickening sound of tearing traversing throughout the air. Still, the result was the same. The white-haired boy in lustrous black armor was untouched. Northern smiled. I can tell how frustrated you must be right now. I mean, you are supposed to be a devilish behemoth, and I really had my hopes high when you were coming. His mouth contorted with disgust. So all you were coming here with was a shell that could absorb and reflect attacks and some energy beams? Lame. Truly lame. Perhaps the monster did not understand him word for word, but that condescending look on his face could be understood quite clearly. And seeing as the creature let out a sharp, screeching cry resembling that of a vulture, Northern was sure the message got delivered smoothly. The dark turtle's red veins pulsated with even stronger energy. They flowed through the air like sentient energy tendrils, converging before the monster. While the monster did that, Northern, out of boredom, picked his nose with a disinterested look on his face and blew it toward the dark turtle. It struck again. An enormous field of red energy burst forth. Northern looked forward as the field expanded. Then, with a single, fluid motion, he threw the chaos flame. The force was so fast it struck before anyone could trace it. For a moment, nothing happened. The lance seemed to freeze in place, suspended in the crimson energy field. Then reality screamed. The point where the lance met the energy field began to unravel. The crimson energy didn't disperse or reflect. It simply ceased to exist, along with the air and space around it. A void opened up, spreading outward like cracks in glass. The dark turtle's attack wasn't just negated. It was being consumed, erased, burned away by something that shouldn't exist. The creature tried to reinforce its defense, its shell blazing with power. But it was too late. The chaos flame struck true. Chapter 587. An impossible feat. The moment the chaos flame made contact with the dark turtle's shell, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened again. But this time, it was as if the universe needed time to process what it had just witnessed. Then, a sound unlike anything they had ever heard tore through the air. It wasn't an explosion, nor was it the creature's screech. It was the sound of existence being rewritten. Where the chaos flame touched the shell, space itself began to warp and twist. The black armor that had seemed impenetrable moments before began to dissolve. No, dissolve wasn't the right word. It was being unmade. The creature's eye widened in what could only be described as pure terror as it watched its own shell begin to disappear. Not chunk by chunk, but concept by concept. Northern stood watching, his face a mask of cold satisfaction. Interesting. The white flames spread across the shell like cracks in reality itself, each tendril erasing not just the physical matter it touched, but the very idea of that matter's existence. The dark turtle let out another screech, but this one was different, desperate, primal. It tried to move, to retreat, but the chaos flame had already taken hold. "You can't run from this," Northern said quietly, almost gently. "What's being erased isn't just your shell. It's the very concept of your defense." The others watched in horrified fascination as the process continued. Where the shell disappeared, they expected to see flesh or bone or whatever lay beneath. Instead they saw nothing. Not darkness, not void, but a complete absence of anything that could be perceived. Shin's face had gone pale. "This power! What in the world?" Dante muttered, his voice barely a whisper. The dark turtle thrashed, its movements becoming more erratic as more of its shell vanished. The red veins that had pulsed with such threatening energy now flickered weakly, like dying embers. Northern took a step forward, his eyes glowing with that eerie blue light. "Want to know something interesting?" he asked the dying creature, his voice carrying easily despite the chaos. "The reason my attack worked wasn't just because it was powerful." The creature's eye fixed on him, and in that moment, understanding seemed to pass between them. "Your shell was designed to absorb and reflect any attack," Northern continued. "But the chaos flame isn't really an attack. It's a concept that exists far beyond any. It was the first entity to be birthed from nothingness, and better than every other entity, it carries that inexistential essence of destruction. Because it is destruction, the force itself has a nature of a destroyed state. Hence, it's a force that is existing but at the same time not existing. You can't reflect what doesn't exist, and you can't absorb what denies the very concept of absorption." More of the shell disappeared, and now the process was accelerating. The white flames had spread to cover nearly half the creature's massive form. "In a way," Northern mused, "you could say your perfect defense was exactly what made you vulnerable. The more your shell tried to absorb my attack, the more it invited its own destruction." The dark turtle made one final attempt to fight back, gathering what remained of its crimson energy. But as it tried to release it, the energy simply vanished, consumed by the spreading flames. Northern watched impassively as the process neared its completion. And that's why. He never finished his sentence. At that moment, the last of the creature's shell vanished, and with it, the dark turtle itself began to unravel. Its massive form didn't explode or collapse. It simply ceased to be, erased from existence piece by piece, concept by concept. The final thing to go was its eye, that crimson orb that had seemed so threatening mere minutes ago. As it faded from existence, Northern could have sworn he saw something in its gaze. Not fear or anger, but a sort of resigned recognition. Then it was gone. Where the dark turtle had stood, there was now only empty space. Not a crater or a void, but simply untouched ground, as if nothing had ever been there at all. The white flames flickered once more before dissipating, leaving behind an eerie silence. Northern lowered his hand, his expression thoughtful. "Well," he said after a moment, "that was educational." Behind him, the others stood in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The casual way Northern had erased a behemoth from existence had shaken them to their core. But Northern wasn't paying attention to their reactions. Chaos Flame had worked exactly as he'd theorized, perhaps even better. And now, a small smile played across his lips as he thought about the implications. This was just the beginning. His eyes radiated like stars as he anticipated the amount of fragments he was going to have. He looked down, waiting eagerly. However, the system never came. A second passed. 2 passed. 5 passed. Don't tell me. Since he erased the concept of existence for that creature, could it be that the system didn't count that as a kill? No way, that can't be happening. Northern shook his head. That can't be it. If Ull was the one in charge, he would have accepted that the phenomenon made sense. He erased the monster's concept of existence. It was possible that in Ull's book, the monster didn't die, it just never existed before. Something has got to be going on. Just as Northern was thinking, the first tab appeared. His eyes lit up immediately. Congratulations! You have reached a new level of mastery of chaos. Attribute Chaos Flame has gained its true form. Your proficiency with chaos has grown. Chaos is proud of your achievement. Chaos nods in acceptance of your existence. Void sneers at chaos. They seem to be having the time of their life inside of me. Those two. Anyway, fragments, I'm waiting for the fragments. Due to your understanding of chaos, heritage has leveled up. Oh? I wasn't expecting that. You have gained a new heritage ability. You did not just slay a monster, regarded as a monstrosity in its own lane. You overwrote its concept, outsmarting all. This is a tremendous achievement. You have gained plus 10,000 talent fragments. Due to penalty of not copying any talent, you cannot progress to a new soul rank for 180 days. Chapter 588. Better late than never. Northern lowered his head and supported his forehead with a finger. He was hiding his facial expression from everyone. All the muscles of his facial features twitched from an intense desire to let out a burst of ominous laughter and cry at the same time, but Northern suppressed them, not wanting to be asked what exactly went wrong. Even so, his shoulders still trembled where he stood. Is he crying? Raphael cocked his head slowly as he observed Northern. Others were also as inquisitive, only silently. Their expressions betrayed their thoughts. Ryan, however, was slightly different. There was a look of determination that rose upon his face. His hands tightly folded into a wrecking ball, capable of breaking even the strongest of walls. He had never been known to be ridden with such determined look sparkling in his eyes. Ryan was the indifferent type, and everyone that knew him so far had come to settle with his introverted nature. Seeing someone like that suddenly resonate with determination was slightly surprising. But then again, with the magnitude of power that Northern had just shown everyone, it was understandable that even he would feel like that. How annoying! I thought I would be able to become an ascendant before leaving this damn rift. Northern straightened his back, raising a somber face to the sky. Currently, he had 6 talent slots, He had copied one, so he had 5 more to fill. And he had 6 months to do that. That meant he was going to be stuck as a sage for the next 6 months. 6 months was plenty of time to become a paragon and start looking to shoot beyond, at least for someone like him. But because of the damned punishment for not absorbing talent, he wouldn't be able to become a paragon and instead would be stuck as sage. Northern felt his soul breaking and breaking as he continued to dwell on the thought. Shit, let's just look to the bright side of this. He was going to be able to delicately choose talents to copy and kill unrestrained, so he'd be able to earn as many talent fragments as possible. If he was to add 5 strong, at least S-class talents to his repertoire, it would be a great boon. That was an understatement. He might be able to boost his attack and defense powers with a lot of powerful talents. Northern nodded with a small smile palely playing on his lips. After the long, stretched, tense silence, he finally turned around, the smile leaving his face like an exorcised ghost. I hope everyone is fine? All of them stood, bleak and speechless, just staring at him. He smiled and clapped. Well then, I guess everyone is okay. From here on out, I don't know what we will be facing, but I know there will be more monsters like this one. So let's be careful while the offense is left to me. I will protect everyone. Northern said with a smile that didn't even reach his face. They did not doubt his words, however, it looked to them, especially the lieutenant's subordinates, that he did not want to do this. Whereas Northern was just dealing with the residual pain of not being able to become a paragon in 6 months. Damn penalty. Damn system. Shouldn't it have just warned me ahead? But then, it's a good thing, it's a good thing. He consoled himself over and over again, but the lingering regret wasn't able to get rid of. He just turned and started walking away. Others also started moving, following him closely from behind. Their looks had changed, admiration sparkled in their eyes, and they tried to come closer to him without getting too close. Perhaps they now felt safer protected by his tall frame and lustrous black armor glinting sinisterly beneath the crimson sky. Northern continued forward wordlessly for a few minutes, instead observing his panel and searching for anything he needed to pay attention to. Profile. Name. Rian Artemis Riem Guard, Northern Long Guard. True name. Nameless, superscript 3. Attributes. Formless, limitless void, vestige of chaos, chaos eyes, chaotic regeneration, chaos flame, seed of void, chaos infusion, chaotic resonance. Soul rank, transient, void summons, 7/100, talent fragments, 10042/6000. Copied talents, February 6th. Owned talents, 4. Attribute abilities, active/passive, October 11th. Owned items, Mortal Blade, Eternal Twilight, Death Glare, and 13 others. Northern's brows furrowed. It's even worse than I expected. I fought so many monsters and not even a single item. Damn you all, you must hate me so much. Northern also welcomed the idea that he probably does not exist in Ull's book. It was totally understandable and he wasn't angry about it. What he lacked for items, he made up for with the amount of soul cores he possessed. I still need to work on my collections of items the moment I get out of here, find additional ways to augment my strength and strengthen my weaknesses, although I have none. He grinned eerily at the realization and quickly erased it as he turned his focus to another panel. Chaos Art of Blistering Thousand Steps. Heritage Level 4. Heritage Ability. Chaos Step. Chaos Sword Art 1. Eternal Chaos. Chaos Sword Art 2. Tempest Fury. Chaos Flame. Heritage Heirloom. Grenger. It's the same thing with the attribute? Northern inquired internally, and focused on the text. As he did, more information popped up. Chaos Flame. This is a convolution of all your past breakthroughs with chaos. A flame of chaos now flows in your blood, uniting each ligament and muscle. Because of this flow of flame, your body adaptation to combat styles has increased and a unique trait linking with chaos eyes and formless has been created. Northern stayed confused for a moment, then went back to the main panel and singled out Chaos Eyes. Chaos Eyes, All eyes, passive. Soul alteration, soul disintegration, chow sight, reality warping, chaos constructs, formless flame. All eyes, passive. You possess extraordinary visual prowess, granting you heightened perception and insight into the world around you. Your eyes take on a distinct appearance, glowing with a mesmerizing aura that signifies its power. Soul alteration. You can influence the souls of others directly. You can disrupt the soul integrity of an opponent, weakening their resolve, destabilizing their energy, or even altering their emotions. You can also damage the soul or disrupt harmful curses or hexes cast on others. Soul disintegration. You can merge chaos with soul energy, creating devastating effects. Chow sight. You can perceive the chaos in multiple dimensions of time and space, although in limited flows. You can see brief flashes of the future and trace the past's influence on the present. Reality warping. You can manipulate time and space on a small scale, momentarily slowing down time for a single target, or distorting space to create confusing or unpredictable environments. Chaos constructs. You can create constructs of pure chaotic energy, but fueled by your understanding of soul dynamics. These constructs could be weapons or barriers designed to shatter not only physical objects but also the soul of those they touch. Northern paused for a moment. It seems I have neglected Chaos Eyes for too long. Now that I have Chaos Essence, I should be able to do all these things, right? His might was kind of just beginning to register in his head. Northern, of course, knew Chaos Eyes and its capabilities. But as much as he had potential of doing, he was heavily limited because there was no Chaos Essence. Void Essence didn't and wouldn't fuel these abilities. Upon becoming a sage, Chaos became more active. But Northern had been too preoccupied to inspect meticulously what areas of his abilities needed Chaos to become effective. He sighed. Well, better late than never. Then he continued to inspect the rest. Chapter 589. Devilish Disaster. Formless Flame. Due to your incessant development in combat and the awakening of Chaos' true form that you have caused, Chaos has synergized with your inborn attribute, Formless, to create a high battle intelligence and adaptability. Northern's mouth opened a little bit as he inspected the last ability of Chaos Eyes. He was impressed, very impressed. He had always felt like Formless and Nameless were what he truly owned of what he had become. The rest he considered given. But there was a way Formless and Nameless told the state of his soul before the awakening of the system and its ability to copy talent. However, for those two, late bloomers would be an understatement. But now, Northern was glad to see Formless being mentioned somewhere. Although he was well aware that this was Chaos just taking something in him and creating the best of it, he was still glad nonetheless. Importantly, if what he was reading was correct, this meant that his battle intelligence had gotten way better from what it used to be. And not just that, but he would also be able to easily adapt to other people's combat styles. Northern thought about it for a moment, then the next moment his mood grew sour. If my battle IQ rises, doesn't that mean I will become aware of how to effectively dismiss an opponent without a waste of my time? What I want right now is to enjoy the taste of my own strength and how I step all over my opponents who consider themselves strong. He scrunched up his eyes like a discontented child. Then he shifted his mindset with the next breath. I guess I just have to find stronger opponents, I guess. Ultrail was a broad world. He was sure that he'd always find people to satisfy his hunger for battle and growth. And as for monsters, that was the easiest part. The devilish behemoth was strong. If it hadn't been for the Chaos ability that he used, they might have been caught in a stalemate because his attacks would keep getting absorbed and reflected while the reflected attacks would never reach him. What if it had been an apex behemoth? Northern's mind drifted away to an actuality that he had not considered all the while that he was in the rift. He suddenly stopped. His sudden stop prompted the others to slowly come to a halt. They observed him from behind. Northern swiftly turned to them, lingering for a few seconds before his voice came out. It was a stressful battle for all of us. I think we should rest here. Going forward, it will be advisable that we are well prepared to end the rift once and for all. All of them widened their eyes. What is he even talking about? They were not sure how long time had passed, but it wasn't just that easy to clear a rift. How could he be so casual about it? Their eyes told. However, it didn't take a second to realize that this rift had looked seemingly easy because of Northern. Immediately, their gazes understood and quieted down. "Well then, I will cut some of these woods for fire," Shin said with a light tone. As he spoke, he tapped Alistran's shoulder and both of them walked away. The atmosphere got somehow lighter, and everybody suddenly seemed to ease from all the tension they had been walking with. They were now surrounded by a forest of seemingly plagued trees. Branches spread like the twisted and disjointed limbs of a witch. Each of the dark trees was sparsely and ominously standing, reaching for the crimson sky with their austere arms. The ground was more soily than what they had witnessed before now. Black soil that seemed to retain a lot of water. The water streamed out, filling the marks left by their footprints. Northern walked up to Lieutenant Dante, who watched him come with a small frown on his face. "Is the offer still on the table?" Northern asked as he stopped in front of the lieutenant and raised his head to meet his eyes. "I don't think you'd be needing it. You are plenty strong already." "No, I'm not even close to where I want to be at. I want to be the strongest in the world. And for that to happen, I need to get all my foundation right. And foundation is the one thing I lack." Northern paused for a moment and continued with an interesting look in his eyes. "I need absolute mastery over every movement, down to my smallest muscle. I need to know what the basics are and root myself in them so that over time, I'll be able to produce a unique style that I better understand myself and also be versatile in its usability and ability to discern and disrupt my opponent's style. For all this to be possible, I need to have not just good but perfect grasp of the basis. Don't I?" Northern raised his head to meet the lieutenant's again, that interesting look glowing in his eyes. Lieutenant Dante was silent, shocked, his eyes meeting the light in Northern's eyes with a paling realization. He froze for a moment, then his eyes moved. He blinked and sighed. "Is something wrong?" Northern asked, slightly concerned. "No, nothing is wrong. It just strikes me that your mentality is crude. With all you can do, you are still thinking like that. It's scary. I fear for your future opponents." Northern raised a brow. What is he on about now? Or does he want to back out now? He narrowed his eyes. "So will you teach me? Or are you beginning to change your mind?" The lieutenant moved his hand and rested it on the hilt of his sword hung on his waist. "Why not? I made you an offer and the value of that offer just increased. As uncomfortable as it is, I will fulfill my quota, even though it is utterly uncomfortable, seeing as I might be helping the hatching of a devilish disaster." "That's quite the description." Northern frowned a bit but eased his brows immediately. "All right then, so let's start." His voice sounded with so much energy. "Follow me." The lieutenant spoke and turned away, walking away from where the group was gathered. Northern followed close behind. Chapter 590, Grasping the Fundamentals. Lieutenant Dante led Northern to a secluded part of the forest, its dense shadows providing a makeshift training ground. The black soil beneath their feet was firm enough here, having dried somewhat compared to the saturated ground they'd passed earlier. The world fell silent around them, the rustle of plagued trees fading into the background. "First," Dante said, drawing his sword with deliberate slowness, "forget everything you think you know about fighting." Northern raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "Combat isn't about the flashiest technique or the most powerful strike. It's about efficiency." Dante assumed a basic stance, feet shoulder-width apart, sword held at a diagonal across his body. "Watch carefully." He executed a simple horizontal slash through the air. The movement was so clean, so precise, that it seemed to leave a lingering trace in the crimson air. "Now you try, just like that." Northern mimicked the stance and slashed. His movement was faster, more powerful, but lacked the same clean precision. He stopped and looked at Dante, who seemed to be thinking with his hands resting on his sword. "Again," Dante commanded. "But this time, feel how your weight shifts. Every motion in combat starts from the ground up." Northern repeated the slash, this time paying attention to his footwork. He used not just his hand but his entire body to swing. The movement felt different, more controlled. Better. Dante nodded. Now watch this. The lieutenant performed the same basic slash, but this time it flowed into a complex sequence of movements. His blade danced through the air in his signature style. Elegant, efficient, deadly. Each motion flowed perfectly into the next, like water coursing through a carefully constructed channel. I don't know what style and form you have built so far in battle, but form serves as a drive core which you use to create a flowing sequence. With a strong form and footwork to ground the basis, you will find your slashes easy to link and adapt into each other. Dante explained, continuing his demonstration. But without understanding the fundamental principles, you're like a river without banks. Power dispersed rather than focused. The lieutenant was right. This was the norm. Form was the personality of combat. No two combat styles could share the same form. Perhaps their basics could share the same principles and rules of form, but there was bound to be slight differences that in the long run deviate to create their own unique personality. But the problem was, Northern did not believe in form. He saw it as a limitation. Perhaps formless was a form of its own kind, perhaps it eviscerated the concept of form and made it make no sense. Northern was not sure, but the one thing he knew was that contrary to what anyone would say when the matter is presented to them, formlessness is impossible. It had been made possible because of the attribute which he has because of his corelessness. This might mean that I am the only one in this world that can do it? He grinned and returned his focus to Lieutenant Dante, who continued to demonstrate a unique sequence of sword strikes. Northern carefully watched how the lieutenant swung every slice of his sword with the same precision. When he broke into a linked combo swing, the effort put into each swing strength did not break at all, not even in the slightest. His eyes widened slightly as he began to see the underlying structure in Dante's movements. The lieutenant's style wasn't just about the sword. It was about turning his entire body into a weapon, using momentum and balance to create devastating combinations. I have seen you move. Your current fighting style relies heavily on overwhelming power and adaptability. Dante continued, coming to a stop. But imagine combining that with perfect technical execution. Northern's eyes gleamed with understanding. For a moment he was worried as to why he found this so easy to understand. It was almost like he couldn't wait to start fighting already. But he quickly dismissed the eagerness and assumed the basic stance again, this time feeling how each part of his body connected to the whole. He had done it before, but it wasn't just about the swing. It was about before the swing started. I wonder if I can use spatial awareness to be more aware of my body than usual. Northern focused on his surroundings, then streamlined to the center. It was like seeing everything but one's eyes, then focusing on those eyes that could not be seen. Only that with spatial awareness, it was possible to see beyond the area of sight. It was not really sight, to be candid. It was just being aware of oneself. That way Northern was able to grasp more vividly his entire body. All this, he did while still maintaining a perfect hold of his surroundings. He naturally felt his awareness become more potent as he pushed it. He could now be more aware of his surroundings and himself, not jeopardizing one for the other. When he slashed, the movement was different. The result was a powerful wind that swung the rigid trees. It was devastating, but with a new level of control. Dante widened his eyes for a moment. What in the world? He grabbed that easily. I thought I'd just give him the lesson and leave him practicing after the rift. But he got it instantly? How does that make any sense? These basics were something that scions of renowned clans and nobility spent their entire childhood learning. It usually took at least 5 years to be able to master such level of control. The result of Northern's strike spoke well for itself. He had done it in just a moment. It could have just been luck. Let me not get ahead of myself. Lieutenant Dante tried to hide the look on his face. He nodded at Northern. Good. Now let's break down the basic forms. There are 8 fundamental angles of attack, and mastering them is the key to developing any personal style. For the next hour, Dante methodically demonstrated each form, explaining how they connected and flowed into one another. Northern absorbed everything with intense focus. As Dante was demonstrating with form, he was dismantling the form and laboriously merging those principles into his formlessness. He was grasping and adapting the fundamental concepts of combat to his own attribute with remarkable speed. What impressed Dante most wasn't Northern's raw talent or quick learning. It was his patience. Despite his immense power, Northern approached each basic movement with the same focused dedication as if he were learning to hold a sword for the first time. Your style will develop naturally, Dante explained as they worked through a complex sequence. The fundamentals aren't chains to restrict you, they're foundations to build upon. Once you truly understand them, you can break them deliberately rather than accidentally. Northern nodded, having already seen how these principles could enhance his combat capabilities. Dante looked up. We should rejoin the rest for now, so we can have our rest as well, especially you. Dante brought his gaze to meet Northern's. You can't tell me that destructive ability isn't expending something in you. Northern's expression was somber for a brief moment. His face darkened but quickly glowed back with resolve. The lieutenant was right. There was a price to pay, only that it wasn't something that could be fixed by resting. But of course he still needed the rest all the same. After all his muscles were sore from all the fighting. Northern responded with a tired sigh. You are right. I need as much rest as I can get. Chapter 591. Mealtime. Northern and Lieutenant Dante came back to a lit fire ominously shading the faces of all those who sat around it. Atop the flames were several sticks plunged into large lumps, sort of darkened from the position Northern and the lieutenant observed them from. But they didn't need to see clearly to know that the group was skewering monster meat. Aside from the obviousness of the act, the sumptuous aroma suddenly made their stomachs growl. Northern gulped and stepped forward, taking a seat next to Ryan, crossing his legs as he joined them on the muddy ground. No one even cared how muddy it was. They were lucky enough to even have semi-hard ground to begin with. The ground wasn't so muddy that it would begin to sink them in. The soil's water-retaining ability was just ample. Northern looked around for a moment. He wondered if Ryan had made a suggestion to freeze the ground, but he immediately got his answer. The cold that came from the ice would affect people, moreover affect the fire, and affect their dinner, maybe lunch or breakfast, no damn person knows. And Ryan was probably as tired as everyone else. Northern didn't want to think such a magnificent ability of his did not come with its own stress. What are you looking at? Ryan growled lowly, a vicious look in his eyes. Northern rolled his eyes nonchalantly and looked away, speaking to himself. Damn, I must be getting mad. I can't believe I almost pitted this crappy son of ice. Ryan glared even more intensely. His tone rang out slightly different than usual. I'm not a son of ice. I am a son of cold flame. Northern raised a brow, tilting his head backward. He blinked several times, his reaction slowed out of confusion. Yeah, I guess, whatever suits you. Then he looked away and thought. Weirdo. There was something about Ryan's reaction that made him sound desperate. And desperation was the one thing Northern had never heard in Ryan's voice since knowing him. That with the words he uttered just freaked Northern the hell out. But he didn't dwell on that. The meat burning in front of him was tenaciously squeezing out a tongue-pleasing smell. Northern right now wanted nothing more than to take it in and munch on it for as long as he could. He stared at the meat, waiting patiently. After a while, his stomach climbed up his throat, pleading to his voice to speak for its dire state. Is this thing not done yet? I'm very hungry. All of them turned to look at Northern, eyes widened. He caught their eyes and immediately frowned. What? Can't I eat? He inquired, looking at all of them. They were all silent, withholding whatever tinged the edges of their tongues, utterly careful of their words. After a while, someone's voice shattered the eerie silence. It's not like that. Just casually hearing you say you're hungry kind of reminds us that you are human. Northern squinted his eyes, pulling his head back in confusion and folding his arms. What nonsense are you spouting right now? Ah. Raphael, who had spoken, released an awkward half-laugh. Forgive me. This monster probably has a lot of rottenness in it. Alistran's voice proceeded immediately as Raphael's vanished. It needs to be skewered longer than usual, so whatever toxins in it can be dried out and the skin can be completely burned. If you want to enjoy it, you peel the burned skin and eat the meat. The explanation cleared all of Northern's questions. But he was still left confused by something. He tilted his head slightly as he asked, "I don't understand. Has anyone hunted this kind of monster before?" "No. But there are rarely any kinds of monsters that are not in the books. As a walker, fundamental knowledge is important. These things are taught there. I thought you were a student of the academy." Northern frowned. He lingered a bit with a sour mood. As he wanted to reply, Ryan's voice beat him to it. "We didn't get the chance to become actual students before we got jinxed." Northern, with slightly widened eyes, looked at Ryan. Their gazes met for a beat, then Ryan looked away. Shin watched this happen and felt his heart tear into two. Once again, he was reminded of what their overprotection of the poor boy had done to him. And an embarrassing moment like this one was the least harm it had done. Well, among the fundamentals of Rift survival education, there are several types of monsters and ways to eat them. Of course, most of the safest ways is by... Alistran gestured to the fire with his hands to end his statement. "There are several other ways, but I don't think that's a lesson for tonight. If we get back alive, I will arrange a short class for you guys in the Citadel. But the most important thing you must know is that it's important to carry a piece of monster meat with you for every kill. It will come in handy. That explains why there are so many." Northern glanced around and focused back on the meat. Silence drowned the atmosphere once again. Then, after a couple more minutes, Raphael took out the meat and started handing it out to all of them. After Lieutenant Dante received his, he walked away saying, "I'll keep watch. The rest of you can sleep." Northern watched the rigid man walk away, his fine coat swaying left and right with every step he took. For a moment as he watched the lieutenant, he thought, maybe he's just a nice guy in a tough shell. After all, Lieutenant Dante had done him a favor most drifters would be reluctant to do. Of course, he didn't forget that there was a prize, but he wasn't so sure how heavy of a prize he would have to pay for this generous offer. "Whatever it will be, I'm sure it'll be worth it." Northern took the meat into his mouth, gently savoring every delicate delicacy of it. Chapter 592. DIY. Northern stood in a training ground in the tower. The training injuries that were left there by Jesai had fully healed. The place was as good as new. He grounded his feet to the floor, his eyes fixated on the wall in front of him, focused and rigid. They bore an awareness of not just what was before him but even behind. His entire body stood as a singularity even with his sword. Only when he was finally internally satisfied with his stance and basis of grounding did he move. Northern began to execute a series of slashes, swinging his sword delicately. There was a magnificent air of control that trailed the path of the sword each time it divided the air. Northern's eyes remained as focused as before he moved, even as he flowed from one strike into another. With the same amount of swiftness, power, and precision, the sword flowed from one movement into another, not increasing or decreasing. That was what he had noticed Dante do, and that was what he had admired. Dante was so in control of his sword that from the first linked attack to the last, the speed of his sword and precision did not reduce or increase. It was as if the lieutenant had a perfect proportion of power that he calculated to put into the strike and maintained it from beginning to end. Northern did not see anything greater than this. That act itself spoke for a level of control he had never witnessed in anyone. And it made him very exhilarated. He didn't think he could have such control, thanks to the immense strength he now possessed as a sage. But seeing Dante do it lit up a spark in him. While he pretended to sleep in the surface world, he slipped into the limitless void and began to practice. Northern continued to practice each strike with a certain amount of dedicated control. He would put a certain proportion and swing in linked strikes, flowing from one attack into another. When he used an enormous amount of strength, usually, it resulted in the walls of the tower suffering for it. And it was difficult to reduce it. It was also difficult to control the amount of strength he put into a strike mid-battle. But he continued at it, practicing. He didn't need to get it yet. All he was creating right now was a foundation. a foundation which he would use to create his own unique style using the abilities of chaos art as raw material. He didn't know if the system would appreciate it yet, but the new ability DIY allowed him to do these things. Aside from the fact that when he absorbed talents they were tailored to suit the nature of his void and chaos, Northern, thanks to DIY, could now also create new abilities explicit to him alone as long as he understood the principles. Being able to bend certain principles and create constructs of chaos, as long as his understanding was flawless, could have contributed to it. And it would also make it easier to do. Another thing Northern was glad about that DIY brought to him was
Talent merge, talent uave, talent iresure.
With talent merge, he could join two talents together to create something never seen. Talent we've allowed him to bring out the abilities of some talent and put it into another talent or even remove them from each other to create a unique soul talent that had probably never been seen. Talent erasure. He could delete a talent he deemed useless. But the magnificent thing about these abilities was that as far as the system was concerned, they didn't just work with talent, they worked with abilities. It was the reason why what he did with Black Flame and Black Lance was possible. And the reason why he was able to achieve the unachievable. Because of DIY. Usually, revealing chaos true form should not be something that he could dare with a minimal amount of chaos in him. And it was why it was regarded as a tremendous achievement even by chaos itself. The essence of DIY was that he could now tailor anything to suit his nature and also create his own unique abilities from scratch, by deep knowledge and understanding. That was why Northern was swinging this hard and training despite the ball of sweat that rolled down his face and soaked his black shirt. The dark mortal swung in his hands with a cold intensity, whistling through the air with a dark and eerie thrill. Northern stopped for a moment and focused on the sword, narrowing his eyes as he considered a few things. He loved swords very much, maybe because they were the first kind of weapon he ever used or because they were easy to use, but he loved them and had grown attached to using them. However, this was bad for him. He carried an essence of formless. His identity lay in not having an identity. This made him a very volatile and versatile existence. An attachment of such could limit his explosive potential. Northern felt the need because of this to discard the sword for a while, or so that it wouldn't go to waste, give it to someone else. Northern dropped to the ground, leaning his back against the wall while thinking about it. I guess it's time to create another void summon. As he spoke, his scenery switched before his eyes, transitioning to the ethereal vicinity of the Void Palace, with Northern sitting cross-legged on his softly glowing white throne. This time it shouldn't be too difficult. He muttered and summoned. Hentu. The shadow instantly appeared before him. It was like dark smoke molded into a humanoid shape but unstable and emanating some of its properties into the air. This is going to be so easy and fruitful, I believe. Northern licked his lips as he spoke, then summoned a clone. A perfect appearance of himself appeared before his eyes. Northern stared at the clone for a while and smiled. Then he pointed to his forehead, where opened a vertical eye, mind eyes, that he had received thanks to Revan's awakening. Upon becoming a savant and a sage, Northern's cloning had gained two more abilities. The first one, clone durability, could increase the durability of several clones drastically, but this was also in proportion to numbers. For example, how durable 100 clones would be could never be compared to how durable 10 clones would be. The latter would be able to take so many damages and still retain their numbers, while the former would disappear instantly. The second one, conscience. This was the best thing ever that had happened to Northern regarding this cloning ability. With Mind's Eye, he could now share a part of his memory with a clone, giving it a unique memory and sense of self. From there, it awakens an identity and goes on to develop continually, to its own person while still having a link to Northern. The downside of this new ability, however, was that when the clone returned to nothing, all that progress disappeared. When he created a new clone, it would have to start from the beginning. Of course, that could now be fixed thanks to the knowledge of Void he employed in creating unique Void summons. With that, his Void summons would develop a sense of self not left to chances. The memory he gave them had the most important role to play in what personality they turned out to have. And thanks to Mind's Eyes, he could choose the exact memory he wanted to give the clone. Northern thought for a while about what memory to give it. Then a big, wide, wicked grin spread on his face. Raven, I will be preparing a damned gift for you. Chapter 593, Sword King. A perfect creature that would exist only to hate Raven, an existence incapable of forgiving her. Its reason for growth would be solely to kill her, and that would become the foundation of its developing personality. Northern was curious about what kind of summon it would grow to become. He transferred the painful memory of enduring all the stress of the sleeping mountain and the damned rift, of fighting the sky abomination and sacrificing his way home to kill the monsters, only to discover that Terrence and Raven had known all along. In fact, that may have been the main reason they approached him in the first place. They, knowing full well what they had been planning, took advantage of an innocent child like him. Wasn't she supposed to be 18 or something? And that darn Saintess. Both of them are shameless wenches. Northern cursed. Transferring the memories made them resurface along with his feelings of hatred and regret. All those feelings combined would build the foundation for his new summoned soul. They had tricked and used him, made him feel worthless. After everything, he couldn't help but think himself the dumbest person alive. The facts had been obvious, but he had turned a blind eye to it all in his desperation to go home. He couldn't believe he had even trusted her enough to turn his back to her. As the memories returned, there were so many things he couldn't help but hate himself for. His hatred for her grew even more vile and pronounced, and with all gladness of heart, he would give that hatred a will and a name. Should you step foot onto this land's soil, I have a creature who will know no satisfaction or joy until he kills you. Northern grinned as the mind's eye closed and disappeared from his forehead. He stared at his clone, waiting for its reaction. The replica stood motionless, but there was a change in the creature's gaze. There was a different light, something more alive that he had never seen in any of his clones. Its eyes had suddenly gained focus and radiated intelligence. But the clone remained silent. Its gaze stayed fixed on Northern's face, somewhat confused. A corner of Northern's lips curled up. Now for the final touch. Northern summoned a particular soul. He had been eyeing and studied its panel. Name Byran. True name, Sword King. Attributes, Old One, Third of the Tomb King. Soul rank, Ephemeral. Soul core, Yellow. Talent, Breath of Eternity. Talent abilities, Eternal Pulse, Veil of Remembrance, Soul Imprint, Moonlit Whisper Style, Single Raw Path. The panel appeared just as he had first seen it. If it's someone like this, Dark Mortal should find better use in his hands. I will be able to learn from him while becoming more familiar with other weapon forms. The main purpose in choosing this route wasn't just to create another summon, but to create one who would be useful both as a fighting servant and as a teacher. There was something about these old ones, the souls he got when Soul Taker broke. They were definitely from an ancient civilization. Although Northern couldn't tell yet whether it was Trail or the underworld, he was sure they had been influential in their time, as much as kings. The true name Sword King sat well with him and seemed to provide all the conviction he needed to give the dormant soul a will. Everything was ready, but any problems would stem from what Northern didn't know about these souls. This was why he remained skeptical. But he resolved himself one final time and began the process. With his consent, the soul of Byran merged with that of Hentu, creating an ominous spinning of black shadow. With the spin came a violent gale that disturbed the gentle dance of the void flames burning before Northern's throne. The flames rose viciously in response to the tempo of the gale before falling again. Northern watched as each void construct linked to another. There was a consumption of each one, and with his guidance, the consumption ensured neither soul essence was viciously consumed to nothing. This was also why he hadn't added his clone yet, because he wanted the clone's will to have more control over whatever this new creature would become. He made it wait out of the struggle. When both souls had grown weaker, he would add the clone, which would then dominate the other two, allowing the body and mind formation to take place. After a while of swirling darkness, something began to appear within its deep bosom. Light drilled forth from its deepest depths. Northern looked at the clone. His eyes were command enough, as both he and the clone shared a link. The clone walked into the swirling darkness and was swallowed by it. Northern folded his arms and watched with slightly narrowed eyes, tension sparking in their depths. After a few more minutes, the darkness reduced its swirling and began shaping into a humanoid form. The darkness thickened and became more defined, looking glossy and lustrous as arms formed, fingers extended, and the unstable head became more definite. The glossy surface began carving out facial features as if an invisible hand sculpted them delicately. With time, everything became defined, and when all features had been sculpted, Northern opened his hand. A single white flame ignited on his palm. As his hands moved closer to the creature, its chest opened, as if the flames were clearing their own path. Northern placed the chaos flame inside the creature, and immediately, the thick darkness covered it. Several lines of radiant light began rapidly streaking across the creature's body. When it finished, the veins of light began shimmering even brighter, and the thick darkness seemed dried out. As the light intensity grew brighter, the darkness began peeling off and falling, dissipating into dust. This continued until a clean ivory skin was revealed from the peeling darkness, snow-white hair cascading down the shoulders to the middle of the back. A sharp, angled white brow shaped out, slightly twitching, but the eyes remained closed. As the human's eyes opened, white light flooded his entire form and slowly dissipated. As the light disappeared, a deep red cloak wrapped around him, billowing like a shadow. Beneath it, a black robe layered over a crisp white shirt, with a narrow black tie peeking through the open collar. The cloak's inner lining was pale gray, softening its edges as it draped over his shoulders. His cropped, light gray pants stopped just above his black boots, which glinted under the light. Tiny charms dangled at his hip, swaying with the soft and slow wind, and a single red pendant rested against his chest, catching the eye with a quiet, fiery glint. Northern was awestruck. The man radiated more elegance than he had ever encountered in his 2 entire lives. The man's sky-blue eyes met his azure ones, quickly measuring him in a blink. Then a slight frown bent the man's fine brows. "I don't have a sword. I need a sword." Chapter 594. To-Do List. Northern sat cross-legged while others were sound asleep, his eyes distant. He looked like he was staring at the tree in front of him, but his eyes were so out of focus that it was obvious his mind was somewhere else. What in the world have I created? What have I done? He couldn't answer the question himself. He tried to piece together and compare his new summoned Byran with Revant. Of course, Revant was probably more powerful, though that was subjective, but there was a fine and dangerous aura that Byran exuded. It was ancient, resplendent, Empyrean, and most importantly, humbling. Compared to how Revant shared a drastic familiarity to his appearance, distinguished only by his hair, Byran looked nothing like him. It seemed one way or another the Sword King Byron's original face had managed to merge with his, creating something entirely different. A tall, intimidating man, with a defined jawline and narrowly charming facial features. He had an intense demeanor that rivaled Dante's facial authority, if not surpassed it. And the unique garb that adorned his body only made things more striking. He was outlandishly stunning. And the first thing he asked for was a sword. Northern paused his thoughts for a moment, finally moving his head to look up. He didn't need to test Byran to know that after Revant, this was his strongest summon. He sighed once more and a thought suddenly occurred to him. I don't even know what I'm going to do with all these guys. Where am I even heading? He knew for a fact that he wanted to be the strongest, but what was he really going to do with his life? And from here, where did he want to go? What was he going to do with all these strong beings he was creating out of the void? They were existences capable of shaking the world. Even though incomplete, Revant was a tyrant. The third Tomb King and Ascendant was immensely strong without doubt. A sword in his hands would be like giving lightning to dark clouds. If it didn't cleave the world in two with a strike, it would make the clouds rumble with fear and darkness. And there was Revant, a disaster waiting patiently to happen. He didn't think taming a tyrant would be easy, or even possible. But from now until Revant began to be a problem, he would be of great use. Northern only had to make sure he grew stronger so he could dispose of him before he became a problem. Then there were Night Terror and Black Mamba. Night Terror was currently an emanation of Void, while Black Mamba was a whisper of Void. Both of them have sky-tearing potential to become stronger than Paragons when they become Servant of the Void, the highest rank a Void summon could reach. The Void rank didn't apply to Revant, obviously because of the quality of his soul, but Byran had started as an Echo too. Upon his new birth, he had gained a Void ability, the one thing Revant didn't get to have. If Byran continued to grow and also became a Servant of Void, he would grow powerful too. Comparing it to the might of a Paragon by then would be demeaning. All of them were going to become immensely stronger as he grew. And there was plenty of time for that, after all he was only 16 right now. And then there were Jesai, Linus, and his two dumb subordinates. Linus wasn't really an issue. Northern planned to send him back after making sure he had filled him with sufficient fear. Enough for the spoiled knight to understand that nothing but a gruesome fate awaited him should he decide to make an enemy of Northern. But where was he going to put Jesai? How was he supposed to fit all this world of secrets into his daily life now that he had found his mom? Wouldn't he have to keep living with so many lies? It was the one thing he didn't even want to do. But was telling them safe? It wasn't a matter of trust. He trusted his mother and father. But how could he be sure this wouldn't burden them more than he expected? Then there was the impending doom that awaited him should the whole Riemgard Empire find out their prince was alive. The people who tried to kill him at childbirth would obviously come again. Amidst all of this, there was damned Ruffsburg who would emerge as a luminary. Northern didn't yet know how vast the power distance between a luminary and a paragon was. There was no record of it, and if there was, he didn't have access to it. He leaned back on his hands and exhaled. I guess the only choice is to take things one after another. First, I have to copy the lieutenant's talents. Then, for the next 6 months, I'll be going to the academy. Northern's reason was simple. The academy was a ground with many talents. He had thought about the Citadel too, but chose to opt for the academy instead. The academy would have thousands of younglings with immense potential that had not been explored. He also had a strong feeling that he hadn't been able to shake since becoming a master. That red sea of clouds beneath that separated the academy from the rest of the Central Plains. He wanted to know what was there. And he wanted to gain access to knowledge and power. In a citadel that would be impossible. No matter how much he accomplished, the name of the citadel would ring louder than his. But should he go to the academy and start his exploits there, his name would pop up in every event. And while he was at it, he would also be preparing a welcome-back gift for Ruffsburg, just like he had for Raven. There was one other skill he was thinking about learning while in the academy, since it would be influential to his growth and that of his summons. Then he also needed to contact Hao. Northern wasn't sure about a lot of things yet, but he had the next step right in front of him, and for now that was fine. Chapter 595. Quiddities of Void Part 1. From the deep thoughts about his future path came a short nap that replenished his stamina significantly. Although it couldn't be compared to a full 8 hours sleep, given their current location, it was more than enough for Northern. When he woke up, the rest had also risen. The fire had been extinguished, and everyone seemed prepared to move forward. He silently rose from his sleep, stretched his body and savored its fulfillment, then studied everyone's expressions, determining their state of mind. They all seemed fine for now. The lieutenant's subordinates looked somewhat tamed and conversed amongst themselves, although Shane looked a bit paler than before they'd gone to sleep. Alistran seemed to be in a great mood, while Shin was just there, nothing out of the ordinary, his face laden with focus. Ryan was silent, leaning against one of the trees behind them with his eyes closed and arms folded. The only person missing was Lieutenant Dante. Did he keep watch throughout the night? Night or not, it was bedtime. Northern had called it that without much thought. A few seconds later, the lieutenant returned, looking around before stopping, and his authoritative voice rang out. I see we are all ready. I managed to scout the area and it is as Northern said. There aren't many enemies ahead, but the few we will encounter are enormously powerful. The captain even took his time to scout. This man is just so amazing. Shane's eyes glittered with sparkles despite her pale face. The group immediately began to march forward, through the twisted trees in the dark and ominous forest. They continued on foot, their pace neither too fast nor too slow. Having regained much energy from their rest, the journey progressed without stress. They were careful not to expend themselves walking, lest fighting become difficult and torturous. After a while, their surroundings began to change. They were rising higher towards the mountain, and because of that, the air became thin. Breathing became a hassle, and their surroundings grew hot, as if an invisible scorching sun had been buried in the ground. But they continued nonetheless. The twisted trees had greatly reduced in number, becoming even more sparsely scattered than before. The ground seemed dry. Most of the water had streamed down over time, leaving the mountaintop dry, plain, and hard. Northern flinched and narrowed his eyes. He could feel it. They were getting closer to the center of the rift, to its core. Something about this place feels unsettling. Any idea what could be wrong? Lieutenant Dante inquired, looking at Northern. Well, we're getting closer to the center of the rift. I suppose that's one reason, but I also suspect some monsters are moving to attack us. Some? How many? Northern closed his eyes and raised his awareness. His danger sense through spatial awareness spread around and even beyond the mountain, allowing him to vividly grasp the situation around them. He opened his eyes. Well, around 13 to 19 of them. They're all catastrophic destroyers. What pathetic luck we have, the lieutenant lamented in a bored tone. Don't be sad. We signed up for this when we entered a Tier 7 rift. Northern made an effortless attempt to cheer the man. Even in such dire straits, the two of them could still attempt humor. The rest of the group was left speechless. Well then, let's do this. The lieutenant grabbed his sword and was pulling it out until Northern's voice stopped him. No. Dante frowned first, then raised a brow. What? You should sit this one out. Northern was looking forward first, then turned his face to Dante. I'll take care of them all by myself. This is so everyone can get maximum rest. If I'm right, which I hope I'm not, there'll still be more behemoths waiting for us. And let's not forget that the Guardian of the Rift is a Belial rank. I don't know what a Belial looks like, but I don't assume it's going to be anything compared to what we've faced so far. Exactly. That's all the more reason for you to save your strength. Northern smiled at the lieutenant. I appreciate your concern for me, but I'll be fine. Besides, I'm not the one who will be fighting. Lieutenant Dante frowned suspiciously. What do you mean? Lieutenant, can I use my next wish? The lieutenant was silent for a few seconds, hesitating to answer but eventually did. Yes, you can. I wish for you to keep everyone here while I move forward to the top of the mountain to finish the destroyers. Should any slip past me, then you'll be alert to kill them. Lieutenant Dante narrowed his eyes. This guy, he's definitely hiding something. He exhaled and responded. Fine. But don't push yourself too hard. Northern gave a crooked smile and turned away. He looked at his father and caught Ryan glancing towards him. Then he walked forward, leaving the others behind. Soon, his figure became distant. When he was sure he had gone far enough, he summoned. Guys! Pillars of black flames erupted behind him as he walked, and as they dissipated, several beings were revealed, moving with him. A black-haired man with calm, warm, yet unsettlingly vicious eyes, wrapped in a black, almost modern-era suit. Behind Revant, a dark, lustrous monster with 4 devilish red eyes and arms trotted menacingly, its tail curled to one side. Towards Northern's right, a tall man who exuded an antique aura walked with his hands tucked into the loose neck of his inner garb, that now freely displayed his neat black tie and inner white shirt. Behind the man was a lithe black figure with an intelligent and scrutinizing look in his eyes. On his chest was a lightning-shaped white line that branched out to spread over his body. Behind them all was a glossy hunched monster with jagged teeth and 2 red orbs glowing from the depths of its mouth, Corpse Eater. Then following Corpse Eater from behind was a large white tailless beast, walking on all 4 legs. Each movement caused its fur to dance in the wind, its blue eyes radiating excitement. Led by their master, these quiddities of the void marched to battle, together for the first time. Chapter 596. Quiddities of Void Part 2. Northern steps echoed over the rocky ground as he ascended, his entourage of void quiddities marching alongside him. The harsh wind battered them, whistling like a ghostly anthem through the mountain slopes. Yet, each of his summons seemed unaffected, their eyes fixed ahead, gleaming with dark promise. They finally came to a stop after their master did. Northern fixed his gaze forward, his eyes glowing with a cold and powerful light. He then turned around, looking at everyone in a breath before opening his mouth to speak. Just see this as me letting you guys loose. The one who kills the most of these guys gets to be number one. Byron's eyes twitched, and he silently looked forward with an indifferent expression. Revant, on the other hand, had his face contort darkly, while the others went ablaze with an ominous passion gleaming in their vicious eyes. Before the two most human void quiddities moved, black forms blurred past them. Byron's eyes widened. Everything was still pretty new to him, and he had not yet acclimated to things since gaining life. Northern had left immediately after giving him a black sword. He didn't even get to say a word of thanks. And now, there were all these strange creatures that were familiar and at the same time unfamiliar. There seemed to be a lot of thought in his mind, so he looked aloof. Even as Revant shot away, he stayed, patiently watching the monsters that broke out of the ground ahead. The creatures were a twisted fusion of human and insect, their sinewy form covered in armor-like segments with a sickly sheen, as if dipped in the very essence of corrupted blood. Their bodies were long, winding into a massive scorpion-like tail that dripped with a viscous, dark fluid. Multiple limbs, spindly yet powerful, anchored them to the ground, and antennae twitched with an unnatural rhythm, sensing the thick atmosphere of the blood rift. Eyes like pools of tar glinted with malice, hinting at a mind twisted by the plague that birthed it. Veins pulsed beneath their chitinous skin, each beat spreading a toxic glow that radiated the rift's corruption. As they moved, they exuded an aura of decay, turning the air sharp with the scent of iron and rot. They met in a frightening clash with Night Terror, Black Mamba, Corpse Eater, and Revant. Now, even Mr. Fluffy powerfully leaped from behind and pounced on one of them, brutally tearing its chitinous skin away from its body. Byron stayed there for a moment. Then he turned back to face Northern and went down on both knees, lowering his head. Northern raised his brows, his eyes expanding. What is happening right now? Thank you for giving me a sense of purpose and bringing me to life. Wherever Raven is, I will find her and bring her to justice for what she has done to us. Northern tilted his head. Us? Does he understand that those are not his memories? A small frown creased Northern's brows. That's not how this was supposed to go, though? Northern was silent for a while, but he already had an idea of what was happening. If it was just his clone, it shared a sense of self with him. It might have turned out as the clone not recognizing himself as a part of Northern but rather as a singular existence and owning those memories. That was, in fact, what Northern was expecting. But it seemed that the influence of using Byron's soul had affected the results he expected. Byron seemed to recognize that these were his master's memories and pains, and accepted them. What Northern was not sure about was if this would still continue to shape Byron's personality, or if his old personality would intrude just like his intelligence had. Northern sighed and combed his hand through his hair tiredly as he responded. You are welcome, but don't you want to join them? The way it looks, they will be disposing of the monsters soon. It is fine. I do not want to fight for ranks and position. To be yours alone is my joy and gratification. However, I do want to make your immediate wish come true, and show you that you can leave Raven's demise to me. Northern smiled. I like this one. I like this one very much. All right, Byron. Do what suits you. I won't stop you. Northern said and turned away from Byron, focusing on the rest who were in the middle of an intense battle, not minding as Byron disappeared into nothing. Revant moved with fluid grace, his every motion a dance of lethal precision. He closed in on the destroyers, his suit's dark fabric fluttering as he sidestepped the swipes of their clawed limbs. His hands seemed to blur, delivering bone-crushing punches and kicks that shattered chitin and sent smaller creatures reeling. When a destroyer lunged at him, mandibles open wide to tear him apart, Revant twisted midair and delivered a blow to its head with such force that it splintered, black ichor spraying across the ground. He landed softly, a disgusted smirk tugging at his lips. He removed the blood-stained gloves in his hands and exchanged them for clean ones before joining the fray again. Black Mamba moved like a shadow, his form flickering as he phased in and out of visibility. One moment, he was before a destroyer. The next, he was behind it, his hand plunging through its hardened skin to tear out a piece of its core. His aura distorted the air around him, creating afterimages that confused the creatures. The destroyers swung wildly, their attacks missing as Black Mamba evaded with spectral ease. With a swift slash of his hand, he left deep wounds in his enemies, and mercilessly swiped their heads off with his other hand, unequipped with any weapon. Meanwhile, Night Terror struck with terrifying precision. His form sometimes looked unstable as he coiled around the destroyers, tail snapping out with the speed and force of a whip, breaking bones and leaving deep gouges in the monster's hides. The four red eyes shone with an almost sadistic pleasure as he toyed with one of the smaller destroyers, wrapping it in a crushing embrace before injecting his needle-like fangs into its body one after another. The creature shrieked, its limbs spasming as Night Terror's fingers dug deep into its skin. Satisfied, Night Terror released the limp body, already moving on to the next. In the midst of this chaos, Mr. Fluffy was a force of raw power and ferocity. Unlike his companions, there was nothing subtle about his approach. He barreled into the destroyers with earth-shaking force, his massive body a wall of muscle and fur. With each swipe of his massive paws, he sent destroyers flying, their bodies breaking on impact. One creature lunged at him, only for Mr. Fluffy to catch it in his jaws, crushing it in a single bite before flinging it aside. His blue eyes gleamed with fierce joy, and a growl rumbled deep in his chest as he pounced on another destroyer, tearing it apart with brutal efficiency. Before the battle seemed to start, it looked like it was nearing its end. In one moment, all the catastrophic destroyers seemed to have been done away with. Only one was left. Night Terror and Revant exchanged a brief glance, a vicious passion igniting in both their eyes. Northern watched with interest as Night Terror and Revant dashed off towards the final destroyer. The creature's segmented body pulsed with a sickly light, its mandibles clicking in a frenzied rhythm as it sensed the approaching doom. Night Terror's form rippled, darkness seeping from his being like thick smoke. His movement was instant, closing the distance with predatory grace. But Revant was already there, his pristine gloves a blur as he struck at the creature's joints. "You think you can beat me with such slipshod speed?" His face twisted with a wicked grin as he looked at Night Terror while snatching the last kill. The destroyer screamed, a sound that echoed across the mountain slope, its tail whipping between them in desperate defense. Neither moved back. Night Terror's claws raked across its side, while Revant's fist found its mark on the creature's skull, their attacks landing simultaneously. Black ichor sprayed the rocky ground, and the monster collapsed in a heap of broken chitin and twisted limbs. But that did not seem to be the end. Night Terror lunged his claws at Revant, and like a child, Revant dodged and twisted a punch into the creature's abdomen. Northern's lips curved slightly. Interesting. His eyes held a glint of amusement as he watched his creations bristle at each other. Mr. Fluffy sat back on his haunches, his massive form casting a shadow as he observed the tension with those intelligent blue eyes. His fur was matted with the dark blood of their enemies, yet he seemed unbothered. Black Mamba materialized beside Northern, his form still flickering slightly. He tilted his head, watching as Night Terror and Revant squared off. "That's enough." Northern's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "We have more pressing matters to attend to." Revant straightened his gloves, his expression returning to its usual controlled state. Night Terror's darkness receded, though his red eyes still burned with unspent violence. Now, I wonder where Byran took off to. Chapter 597, Two Icons. Northern was in thought for a minute, his eyes carefully scanning all of his void summons while seeming to converse with his brain at the same time. He folded his hands together and lowered his head a little bit, furrowing his brows as he argued with himself. I should be able to finish the rest on my own. If I went full throttle with all my summons, in fact, defeating the rift would have been possible. Maybe I was just short-sighted for a bit. He scratched his chin. But then, how would I have copied these talents? Besides, I still need to copy the lieutenant's talent. Yeah, that alone is enough reason for us to do it together. With that final thought, Northern made his decision to go back and inform them so they could all come along with him, dismissing his summons. Before Northern arrived, Dante had felt the disappearance of all 11 catastrophic destroyers. He stood guarded, with a tense expression on his face. As Northern approached all of them, the first thing he said was, "You killed all of that? Alone?" Northern smiled a little bit, letting it fade as he stopped in front of the lieutenant. "We are due to go forward and end this once and for all." His gaze met with Dante's as he spoke. Then he averted it and glanced around at everyone else. "You don't need to worry, Lieutenant Dante, and I will finish whatever is left of this." He returned his eyes back to Dante again. "Right, Lieutenant?" Dante, his expression rigid and indifferent, exhaled as he closed and opened his eyes, then responded. "Northern is right. It's best everyone else just sit this one out." "I'm coming with you," Ryan declared firmly, his expression becoming stubborn. "Me too. I am still in good condition," Shin also added. "Ryan, it's easy for anyone to know you've outdone yourself in the last full battle. And that is totally fine. There's no way an ability like yours wouldn't have its downside." Ryan frowned. His fist trembled as he clenched tight. Northern was right. The flaw of his talent was indeed beginning to kick in. If anyone looked closer, they'd see that he was getting paler than usual. If he pushed himself any more than he already had, he might have to start fighting through a serious cold that would sting throughout his body. And the reality of this situation was that there was no need for all of that. He didn't need to push himself that hard. Not when Lieutenant Dante and Northern could indeed put an end to things on their own. Northern turned to his father. "You too, father. I know you are in top condition after rising to a new rank, but you should still sit this one out. You'll only get in our way." Dante glanced at Northern as he spoke. Shin gritted his teeth, lowering his head for a few moments before releasing his voice from the jail of his teeth. "I have heard you then. I will stay back, and we will protect ourselves in case things go wrong on any side." "Things won't go wrong." Northern, however, did not say that aloud. Instead, he offered a very short-lived smile and said, "All right then, father. That will be helpful." Shin stepped closer and put his arms around Northern, hugging him for a brief moment. "Be careful out there," he said and released the hug, stepping back from Northern. Northern immediately turned away and walked from the group along with the lieutenant. After they'd gone a little bit further, Dante spoke. "Isn't that quite the heartless thing to say to your own father? Even if he is your foster father." Northern glanced at him, one of his brows tweaking up. "What? It wouldn't take a genius to figure out that the Kageyama scion is not your father. They have a strong gene for black hair. And your white hair is too foreign. If you are not a foreigner, then your parents must be." Northern looked down with a frown on his face. "Was it that easy to figure out?" Lieutenant Dante sighed. "Don't worry. I am not interested in whatever family you are from or the secret you are hiding." Northern raised his head confidently and sighed too. "That's a relief really. Saves me from making a difficult decision." Lieutenant Dante scoffed in disbelief. "I guess it is understandable that someone like you is this cocky." Northern grinned with a corner of his lips, looking at the lieutenant with a playful light in his eyes. "Cocky? Cocky really? I don't press where I know I won't break. Do you want to try and see if cockiness is just what this is?" Lieutenant Dante paused, resting his hand on the hilt of his hung sword. "Are you picking a fight with me?" Northern, seeing how Dante's tone and expression suddenly became tough and authoritative, clicked his tongue in disgust. You can't even take a little joke. Your life must be very boring. That's quite ironic coming from you. Northern tilted his head, squinting his eyes. What do you mean by that? Lieutenant Dante hid a smile and continued forward. He enjoyed the disturbance and managed to leave Northern as he walked ahead. Hey, don't walk away. What do you mean by ironic coming from me? I am very good at taking jokes. I am a very likable person because I am funny. Sure. At least it helps you sleep every night. What? This bastard? Northern trotted forward but suddenly stopped as Lieutenant Dante halted. The lieutenant glanced around, his eyes widened. And only you supposedly did all of this? Northern cocked his head, a menacing light glowing in his eyes, as he walked past Lieutenant Dante with his back. His eyes finding delight in the lieutenant's disarrayed expression. When did I ever say it was only me? Hurry up and let's go finish this, he said as he turned around and suddenly vanished. The lieutenant also followed, his form blurring through the wind, leaving a crimson trail. They continued to the top of the mountain and after a while finally reached its peak. Then they paused. Northern stood at the edge of the mountain and looked down towards its backside. The depth of the mountain was covered in crimson clouds. Somehow, it resembled something he had seen before. That is where the Guardian is? If I am not mistaken. Yes, Northern replied, his gaze locked downward. What is the percentage of you being mistaken? Northern raised his head with a crude grin. 0. None. Chapter 598. The Subordinate. So what is next? Dive? Or walk? Northern stayed silent for a few minutes. Then he scrunched his eyes. Well, whichever one you think is faster. Faster? Why do we have to be worried about speed? If I'm not wrong, a subordinate of mine is already down there. We don't want to miss the fun now, do we? Why do you keep saying if you are not wrong? If you are not mistaken? When you very much know you are not? What's wrong with trying to sound humble? You humans will never be pleased, I see. I suppose you are not one of the very humans you speak about. Northern looked at the lieutenant with a smile. Don't take too long. He fell down the mountain unrestrained, unbothered, his form disappearing into the red cloud. Lieutenant Dante stared deeply for a couple of beats. He really just fell into it? He sighed and walked forward. Unlike Northern, who fell directly as if he was going to sleep, the lieutenant with Steez walked forward until there was no more land, then thrust deep into the ominous depth of the mountain. Northern, as he was about to land, twisted his body mid-air and landed with grace that complemented his frame. The red clouds parted around him like curtains, revealing the jagged terrain below. His metal boots barely made a sound as they touched the ground, a stark contrast to his imposing presence. He tilted his head, listening. The faint echoes of combat drifted through the mist, metal clashing against metal, punctuated by occasional bursts of energy that made the air crackle. Someone was already engaged in battle just as he had thought, and he need not think excessively to figure out who. When he said he would fulfill my immediate desire, was this what he was talking about? Was it possible that Byran, instead of dealing with the monsters just like everyone else, had detected the presence of a much stronger opponent and gone after it to please Northern? How many steps ahead is he thinking? 2? 3? A few moments later, Lieutenant Dante emerged from above, his descent more controlled but no less impressive. His uniform remained impeccable despite the fall. Not a single wrinkle out of place. Show off, Northern muttered, though his eyes held a glimmer of amusement. Your graceful entrance cost us precious seconds. Some of us prefer to maintain a certain standard, Dante replied, brushing an imaginary speck of dust from his shoulder. Even when dropping into what could very well be hell itself. Northern's expression hardened as he gazed into the distance where the sounds of battle grew louder. Hell? No, Lieutenant. You have not seen hell, I have seen hell. Hell is more organized than this place. He started walking, his stride purposeful. Hell is beautiful. The smell of death marinates the air in such a way that it sweetens the nostrils when you breathe it in. And the atmosphere, it's a beauty that will make you look 4 times and still not be able to get enough of what you are looking at. Your face will crumble at the boorish magnificence of what you are beholding. Compared to that, this is just a luxurious wannabe of what I would call hell. I'm really beginning to doubt the tier system of rifts at this point. Dante observed him with a worried expression, making Northern retort. What? Why are you looking at me like I am insane? I can only imagine what vile things being in a monster-infested continent would have done to your sanity as a child. Northern lingered in silence for a bit. Then he shrugged. Actually, it's not as bad as you're making it sound. Indeed, a lot has happened, but I am more sane than any of you in this continent. You all are weak cowards and hypocritical bastards. Are you judging everyone with just the fault of one man? Northern chuckled but did not respond. Instead, he narrowed his eyes, his movement becoming a bit slow. The red mist swirled around them, but it did not obscure their vision enough to hide the corpses of monsters that lay motionless on the ground. Several kinds of the grotesque monsters of the red mist that Northern and the lieutenant had dealt with lay scattered around. The lieutenant studied the corpses for a bit. Your subordinate is a swordsman? A very good one at that. Yes. Northern allowed a little proud smile. He's a new guy, but he might be the best thing that has ever happened to me. Don't go placing your trust in people like that. I'll tell you, it ruins. Thanks for the advice. I don't even do that to begin with. Northern went silent as he observed all the corpses. Then he brought his face to meet the lieutenant's, with a decisive look in his eyes. I guess you have decided what the last wish is going to be. Yes. Let's hope it's something I can do. Northern smiled, attempting to ease the tension that suddenly hung in the atmosphere. Don't worry. It's very much doable. He looked forward. Whatever happens from now till we finish the rift dies with you. The lieutenant frowned a little bit. Before he got to say a word, Northern added, like you said, I do not trust you or any human, but if you mean what you said, then this you should do. If I find out you betray me in any way, death will be the least you are worried about, and you can just forget about that one wish. The lieutenant's expression was somewhat cold and unreadable. There was a faintly dangerous look in the depth of his eyes that seemed to rise like the flames of a furnace, but he suppressed them with a sigh and closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them and responded. It's fine. Your secret is safe with me. Northern smiled and nodded. Well, then, we've got a rift guardian to kill. Both of them continued forward. As they did, the corpses on the ground became more pronounced and plenty. Not to say that all of them were obviously behemoths, disastrous behemoths, calamitous behemoths, and even devilish behemoths. They finally reached a point where the red mist seemed to disappear. In front of them stood a tall cave with a metallic crimson door. In front of them, a white-haired man sat on a heap of monster corpses, blood splattered across his face, his eyes viciously reflecting the faint light of the ominous black blade in his hands. The blood on the dark mortal blade was seeping into the blade itself, and the man watched this with pleasure in his eyes. Then he averted his attention from the sword and looked at the 2 humans who were marching towards him. One of them, sensing the threat he posed, placed his hand on his sword. Your subordinate is quite strong. Is he a paragon too? And how did he get here? Byron stood up, stabbed his sword into the ground, and went down on one knee. Master, you have arrived. I left the strongest one for you and killed the minions so they don't get in your way. Chapter 599. The Test. Northern stared for a few seconds, not saying anything as Byron's eyes lingered on him. The Sword King was on his knee, his eyes fixed upon Northern patiently, with all the patience in the world, waiting for what Northern's response was going to be. Dante stood on guard, his hands fisted around the handle of his sword, eyes locked onto the strange being before him. Every part of his composure was brimming with calculated awareness, showing he was actively gauging his target as much as he was getting ready to strike at the slightest threat. Northern, however, was occupied with something else. His eyes stayed on Byron's entire demeanor, from the unbreaking and resolved look in his eyes to his stalwart composure. And there was just something Northern could not shake off. The feeling of being evaluated. He shook his head. No, he can't be doing that. But there was something strange about this act, unless he was overthinking it and reading extra meaning into what Byron was doing. But if he is not testing me, then why did he not go ahead and deal with the guardian and say, "Oh, master, I have vanquished your foes"? Isn't that what the case should be? It was as if Byron's act of extinguishing the behemoths and even calling them minions was to inform Northern of his worth. And now, he was asking Northern to also prove his own worth. Is it bad? Is there anything bad about it? Nah, if that is what he is doing, then I am utterly disappointed. Even Revant wasn't this daring. Or was he? Northern raised a brow and thought deeply. After another few beats of silence, he frowned. No, he's definitely doing it. The next second following that. No, before the next second. A wild gust of wind blew and Northern was instantly in front of Byron's eyes. His own darkly widened. How dare you try to test me? Byron, shocked as Northern suddenly appeared before his eyes. With how focused his eyes were on his so-called master. He hadn't seen the young boy move an inch. He did not even blink, but Northern's movement bypassed his vision somehow. Or did he not move? Byron was left utterly confused. I'm talking to you. Northern's tone struck like thunder, demanding the Sword King's attention with a lace of fear. He wanted to speak, but only stammers and failed words found him. He went silent, steadied his breath, and his rapid heartbeat. A grin formed on his face, and he bowed his head. I am sorry for my daring act. I wanted to be sure that someone who shares my dream of vanquishing a dreadful foe is worth my attention and effort. He dropped his second knee and kowtowed. But I was only stupid. I see now that I was only ahead of myself. Definitely, the times have changed from what they used to be. And you are definitely a strong man, worth serving and fighting for. It is an honor to share a dream with you. Northern stood upright and glared down at the Sword King from his vantage point. With Byron's heartfelt apology, there was nothing more he could do. Damn. These void entities keep asking for it. He turned back to Dante. It's fine. I have it under control. He won't bite you. Only then did Lieutenant Dante relax from his position and push his slightly drawn sword back into its sheath. He came forward, still observing Byron, even though he was still kowtowing towards Northern. Northern glanced at the colossal door of the cave briefly, his eyes catching a glimpse of a crimson flood-like engraving. Since you were going to do it anyway, stay outside and keep watch till I'm done inside. Yes, master. Do not worry yourself. You can leave these shrubs to me. Byron responded in excitement, raising his head. The moment Byron raised his head, Northern grabbed it and slammed it back down. Don't you dare move an inch from this position, else I'll be sending you into the nothingness you came from. Yes, master, I dare not disobey. With a line of blood streaming down the ground, the Sword King responded full of vigor. Northern stood back up and then moved towards the door. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Dante couldn't hide his shock at what he had just seen. A child treating an obvious adult like a lesser being. All these things just raised more questions about Northern's identity. And for once, he felt very tempted to use that one wish he had gained from Northern. But he resisted the temptation. The value was too small to spend such an expensive opportunity on. Not that he thought little of Northern, but what good would knowing Northern's identity do him? It was better off being left to rest. At the very least, he could understand why Northern had used his last wish to shut him up. Northern stood in front of the door studying its engraving. It looks like these things are telling a story. His voice drove the lieutenant's thoughts away, prompting him to also look at the engravings. Whoever created this must have taken a long time doing it, the lieutenant commented shortly after he began to study it. It seemed like the metal was carved and painted afterwards, but the painting is so amazing. The details of shading are astonishing, is what I would have thought if I was inexperienced. Lieutenant Dante, fascinated by Northern's latter statement, interestingly raised a brow. Okay? So what's your deduction as an experienced drifter? Northern squinted his eyes and moved his hand to touch the door, feeling its smooth and rough surfaces due to the engraved shading areas. This material was entirely forged from blood. The engraving was done when the door itself was in a semi-hardened stage. Lieutenant opened his mouth. Oh, that's quite an interesting deduction. Only an experienced drifter would indeed say something without much evidence. What other evidence do you need? The smell of blood has been prominent since we entered this place. The red mist, the red cloud, and the monsters themselves. All of them are clues that this rift has some ardent attachment to blood. Northern explained, of course, leaving out the fact that he had seen the title of the rift to be one of the 10 plagues, so something definitely must be wrong. Most likely a plague of blood. All right then, I guess it's time to go inside, so we can find out if you are right. A grin tugged at the edge of Northern's lips. Do you like dramatic entries? I wouldn't care any less. Northern fully formed the grin, and with a sudden clutch of his fist, using pure strength, he squeezed the metal in the middle wrinkles folding the surface of the colossal metal door. With a flick of his hand, the gate wrenched itself free from the arms of the cave wall, flying inside and destroying the ground viciously. Chapter 600, The Blood Palace. Northern stepped into the cavern, walking forward over the wreckage of the colossal door, his boots crunching on the warped metal as he strode into the blood-soaked darkness beyond. The air within was heavy, thicker, almost tangible, as if each breath drew not oxygen but the weight of 1,000 souls. The crimson haze that filled the cavern outside seemed to condense here, pooling in murky rivulets across the polished floor. The Blood Palace. The vast chamber unveiled itself in solemn, gruesome grandeur. The walls appeared alive, veins of dark scarlet pulsating faintly beneath their surface, as though the room itself had been carved from a colossal living organism. Overhead, an arched ceiling stretched high into shadowed obscurity, lined with crystalline droplets that glistened like blood-red tears, catching and refracting the dim light into a haunting mosaic. Towering statues lined the length of the hall, each depicting a crusader mid-battle. Their blood-forged forms were grotesquely lifelike, every detail painstakingly rendered. The jagged edges of their armor, the taut strain of their muscles, and the ferocious determination forever etched into their expressions. Some gripped massive swords, their edges dripping with what looked like fresh blood, while others carried shields emblazoned with runes that radiated faint crimson auras. Among them were the standing crusaders, unmoving yet not lifeless. Their poses were rigid, their stances militant, but their eyes burned with a dim, sinister glow. From their fingertips danced faint trails of spell arts, glyphs and sigils of blood magic that floated in the air like dying embers, waiting to be unleashed at the slightest provocation. At the heart of the hall, elevated on a staircase of bones entwined with crimson tendrils, stood the grand throne. No, the thrones. The tallest, central seat loomed over the others, a menacing construct of blackened bone and blood steel similar to the door's material. Its surface was adorned with jagged spikes that seemed designed not for comfort but for supremacy. Seated upon it was a figure draped in flowing robes that shifted like liquid blood, the crimson fabric cascading to pool at the base of the throne like a river of gore. Their face was hidden beneath an ornate helm, its design a fusion of elegance and savagery, with horns curving outward like a crown of violence. They held a scepter in one hand, its tip pulsating with raw, terrifying power that made the air hum with latent energy. Flanking the central throne were lesser seats, each occupied by a crusader in repose, their armor distinct yet unified in a macabre aesthetic. These seated figures exuded a commanding presence, their postures upright, as though ready to rise at a moment's notice to answer their master's call. Northern stopped at the threshold, his gaze sweeping the room. The oppressive energy swirled around him, trying to claw its way into his soul. Lieutenant Dante, who had followed cautiously behind, froze at the sight. His breath hitched, and his hand instinctively moved toward his blade. "It's magnificent," Northern muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, tinged with strange reverence. Dante shot him a glance. "Magnificent? This place is a nightmare made real. Exactly, Northern replied, his grin faint but sharp. Whoever designed this didn't just want to create a rift. They wanted to send a message. Every detail, every inch of this place screams of dominion and supremacy. Northern stepped forward, his boots splashing in the shallow blood pooling on the floor. As he moved closer to the center of the chamber, the seated ruler stirred, the scepter's glow intensifying. The standing crusaders turned their heads in unison, their glowing eyes locking onto him. A low hum of power filled the hall as the spell arts in their hands grew brighter. Northern's grin widened. I suppose this is the part where we make introductions. So, do you want to go first, or shall I? Are you kidding me right now? How? If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions. Just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.